Hey guys, welcome to part 10 of What If Naruto was trained by Anko. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe, and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and also check out my other playlist, hope you would like them too. So let's get started. Chapter 28, Path of Thorns. Curiosity, it was said, killed the cat. It had been a favorite saying of the orphanage workers to caution the curious children. It worked majority of the time, except on the most curious. As Naruto could be counted chief among them. No matter how often he got hurt, he came back even more curious. Curiosity may have killed the cat, but satisfaction had brought him back. That described Naruto perfectly, then and now. It was one of his defining traits, the reason why he could learn under Anko. His curiosity kept bringing him back to her, kept forcing him to try and figure it out until he had it. His need to know was unquenchable, and this was why, instead of doing as other teens might and seek out others, he had isolated himself. Because he was curious about the Kase no Yaiba and his own self-created move Kamikaze no Yaiba. He had been using it for a while, without really thinking about it, but after the last few hours training he had realized it was a devastating move. He wasn't sure how the ranking system worked, but he placed it as a rank and not something to use around allies. After that, he had tried forming a traditional sword of wind, but that sadly had failed, but a spear had worked. Which had led to brief efforts of experimenting with the futon, Daytopper that had resulted in the creation of a brief shield of wind and a whirlwind under his feet to aid his jumps. It was amazing what he was discovering and how much chakra he was using up, yet with each discovery, he filled up just a bit more of the battered scroll he was using. The scroll, which had been discarded by the original owner years ago, was nothing special. It was merely a scroll Naruto had retrieved in his magpie-like tendencies and the first thing he had grabbed before setting out to train. It was the reason he had the scroll that made it special. Ever since learning the Rasengan, Naruto had been thinking about family. Hence the scroll. Every technique he came up with he wrote down, all on the off chance that he ever had a family. It was in essence his way of creating a heritage for any possible children, so that, if he did die, they would not be without a family history. They would have something of his and not have to suffer or struggle like he had. Pulling the scroll into his lap and picking up the pen nearby, he paused, scanning the list of jutsu so far listed and described. Rasengan Cage Bunshine, his version, which Freya said was different than everyone else's, Exi no Jutsu, and how to do the variations Kase no Yaiba, Kamikaze no Yaiba, Futon Daytopper, Kase no Yeri, Kase Toki, and the few seals that he had learned from Freya. Jotting down a few minor notes on the Kase Toki, he sighed, then looked up at the sky. It was about lunchtime, and Anko had told him that morning to make sure and be at the Hokage's office at noon. Something about an important mission Anko had arranged to him, probably as a reward for bringing back those scrolls of Zabuzas that dealt with unity. Shrugging, he finished his notes and then closing the scroll stretched before grabbing his Chunin vest. As happy as he was to be a Chunin, he was not thrilled with the vest. Sadly, since his last remaining jacket had finally fallen apart after the Zabuza fight and the store that had sold them was destroyed by Unity, he was forced to improvise. One dark blue, mid-length sleeved shirt sporting a konoha symbol, orange pants, and a Chunin vest later, he had a new temporary outfit. Slipping the scroll into one of the pouches of the vest, he set off at a brisk pace toward the village. Maybe if he had time he'd see if INO would like to get some lunch, but probably not. The girl was probably busy, twirling her sword around trying to catch up on lost training time. Which meant Naruto would just have to bug Anko, who had finally forgiven him for his prank minus Ooka. He'd bug Shino. But the boy was already bugged enough. Chuckling at his private joke, Naruto picked up the pace, idly wondering what mission he and Anko would be handling. Yamanaka INO felt good, because after so much time, she was finally able to practice her kenbutsu in peace. Of course her elbow was still a tad stiff, but the more she moved her arm, the looser it became. Turning her body, she performed a low sweep of her kodachi, then curved it back up sharply. Her body flowed from stance to stance, guided by her own unconscious rhythm. Hayate now INO's minor style had no formal forms, it was created as the user moved. Spontaneous like actual combat, unpredictable, like any life or death situation. To INO, it felt like she was dancing to some invisible tune and her body moved as if that was true. Actually, if any male were present to see her form, they would have a nosebleed at some of her moves. Coming to a stop, with one last graceful slash, she twirled her kodachi and then returned it to the sheath strapped to her back. It had taken her a while to get the desired alterations, but now the sheath was hidden within the purple fabric. Tsukiya was even better than she could have imagined. Perfectly balanced, the blade gleamed almost unnaturally and her chakra could flow effortlessly through the metal. It wasn't a weapon so much as it was a part of her, and finally being able to wield it had made her realize that she had been missing a part of her. Yamanaka Ino knew beyond a doubt that Kenbutsu was her future. Smiling in self-satisfaction, she left the training field and moved back to the streets, thinking briefly of hanging out with Sakura or checking up on Shikamaru. After all, she and the shadow user had been friends when they had been growing up, but her plans were derailed by two individuals. One was a girl her own age whose name escaped Ino at the moment, and the other was a boy younger than her. Ino knew that the girl was another fangirl. The boy was a new one though, but she had a feeling she'd find out what he was up to in a minute unless she fled quickly. Sadly Ino was too slow and both reached her at the same time. Yamanaka Ino, right? The girl asked cautiously. Yeah. I'm Kasa Yaraman. We took the same flower arrangement course, remember? Right, Ino said slowly, blinking at her name. Yaraman's parents must really has hated her, as if Kasa wasn't bad enough. I'm Kasa G, the boy said excitedly. Ino paused, stared at him, then decided that if Yaraman's parents hated her they downright loathed the Kami. What kind of parents named their children that sort of thing? In comparison to those names, Ino suddenly didn't seem like that bad a name. So, anyway, Yaraman said quickly, a grin on her face. You're on the same team as Uzumaki Naruto, right? Yeah, Ino drawled cautiously, knowing that some of the fangirls could get vicious. You're friends, right? He asked quickly. Yeah. Yaraman hesitated, then lowered her voice, leaning in. Is it true that he's really huge? Ino blinked, then blushed a bright red as the girl's meaning registered. Hell, Ino didn't even want to know how or where the girl had heard that. Honestly, was she trying to live up to her name? I don't know. Never mind that, he interjected impatiently. What's his favorite food? Where does he get his orange jumpsuits? Oh. Is he a good kisser? Yaraman asked excitedly. I don't minus. Can he really do the Rasengan? He added hopefully. Oh. I is minus. Is he dating anyone? Yaraman asked a little too forcefully to be casual. Ino couldn't help but rub her temples and bite back her groan of frustration. Kami. Why did it has to be her? Why couldn't Shino or Anko has to deal with this sort of thing? Does he prefer tempered steel kunai or iron kunai? Steel, though. Ino said with a roll of her eyes. I mean, do you enjoy having to resharpen every last one of your knives every single night? What kind of girl does he like? Spotting more girls and boys hurriedly approaching, Ino actually whimpered. It was amazing to think that such a comfy-looking chair could be so uncomfortable. Shifting slightly, the masked Hokage let out an inaudible sigh. To his right, arms crossed, was the current Unbu commander Tenzu. To his left, surprisingly enough, was the current leader of Root, Danzu. Sometimes it just didn't pay to get out of bed, Kakashi mused, closing his eye. As if he wasn't tested enough just being Hokage, Kakashi now had 3 difficult tasks before him. One was restraining himself from killing the discovered just that morning minus leader of Unity, Danzu. Because Root was loyal to the War Hawk before all others. Konoha needed Root, and killing Danzu would result in a loss of their specialized skills. Then there was the fact this same War Hawk had managed to convince the council into pressing Kakashi, who had still yet to gain full authority minus, into assigning the 2 missions on his desk. One was a simple B-rank mission, and the other was, well, it was a mission Kakashi wished he could assign Anko instead of Naruto. Sadly, the choice wasn't his, but in another week, he'd be free to assign high-ranked missions as he, not the council, saw fit. Why had the Nidaime signed that law requiring a period of limited authority after a Hokage assumed office? Hadn't the man realized that he was for 2 weeks, putting the Hokage under the thumb of the politicians? Hearing the door open, he opened his eye and focused on the woman in the brown trench coat and miniskirt, then looked at the blonde in the tune-in vest. Kakashi blinked, then reached up to rub at his eye. No, it wasn't an illusion. Naruto was actually wearing something normal. Marveling at the wonders before him, he waited for the door to close, and the 2 ninja to stop in front of his desk. Taking a breath, he beamed at them, or more correctly his eye curved up happily. Afternoon. Hi. Yo. Kakashi chuckled to himself, then leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. Well, I suppose I should just get on with this, eh? Selecting the first scroll, he tossed it to Anko, who caught it easily. There you go, one rank B mission. Gonna has fun tonight, Anko muttered with a grin as she unsealed the scroll to check the details. Ooh, this really will be fun. Oi oi, so what's the mission? A high-ranking governor named Benji Bokai has recently been discovered selling INO Kuni secrets. We're not sure to whom, so the important thing is to stop the sales and find out which country is buying, Kakashi explained to the still-reading Kunoichi. It's rank B because Bokai has also enlisted the help of one 2V Mizukai. He was being held in Hayatoshi but recently disappeared. Now, however, he's acting as a bodyguard for Bokai's courier. Mizukai. Naruto repeated blankly, before growling dangerously. I thought that bastard was dead. Well, he's not, and as a former Konoha Chunin he is ideally suited to the job, since he has knowledge of our patrol system. But that's not your mission, Kakashi said, before tossing him the other scroll. This is. Ho. Don't open the scroll just yet. I need to explain a few details first, Kakashi said hurriedly as the boy moved to open it. Standing, he moved away from his chair and stared out the window over the village. This mission is not one I would have assigned you. However, due to your sensei's request, those of some members on the council, and a certain law before I gain total command, I am forced to assign you the mission. Oi, so what is it? An A-rank, solo assassination mission, Kakashi said calmly, turning back to the stunned-looking boy. This mission is very important to Konoha and the country. While Team Anko will be taking care of Mizukai, the courier and the buyer, we need you to take care of Bokai. Wait. Naruto repeated blankly. You want me to kill one of our people? He stopped being one of our people, Kakashi said firmly without breaking eye contact, the minute he started selling our secrets to enemy nations. He's endangering the entire country and everyone within Konoha, along with running operations that are against every moral code imaginable. He has to be neutralized. But why me? Naruto asked, sounding more leery than upset. The why isn't important, Kakashi said firmly, forcing his voice to be level and not to glance at the ever-paranoid Danzu. It's your mission. Do you accept or not? If I don't do this, Naruto said angrily, glaring at him. What, I get sent to that Hayatoshi place? Or do I have to worry about someone coming to kill me? Neither, Kakashi said, narrowing. I promise you that, if you decide to refuse, I will not allow either to befall you. It merely means we reassign the mission and you join Anko and the others. Naruto stiffened, then glared at the scroll in his hands. Kakashi wondered which way the boy would go, acceptance or refusal. Go with his team to stop an equally dangerous threat to INO Kuni, or go on his own to stop the source. In the minutes it took for Naruto to stare at the scroll he was holding, Kakashi wondered which one he wanted Naruto to take. I'll do it, Naruto said, looking up, eyes hard. Very well. Dismissed, Kakashi said curtly, noting the Anko-like coldness in Naruto's tone. Naruto nodded, then not glancing at Anko, rounded on his heel and stormed out of the office. Anko followed, a small scowl on her face. Kakashi, however, sat back down and stared at the now closed door, realizing that the Naruto that had just left was the same one from Fushimi. The boy that had just left his office had been a ninja trained, especially for assassinations. Glancing at Tenzu, he noted the slight alarm on his face. Kakashi, however, turned his gaze away and to the battered red book sitting beside the white and red hat. He had just assigned a forced loyalty test on the most loyal person he had ever met. For some reason he just couldn't bring himself to read his Ika book. Storming out of the Hokage Tower, coat billowing ominously, Mitarashi Anko paused in the street. Looking around he frowned even more, then raised an eyebrow, wondering where the hell that runt had gotten to. A moment later, she spotted him, standing at the end of the street, leaning against a wall, and glaring at the Hokage Mountain. Walking quickly, she reached his side and crossed her arms. So. Anko looked over at him and raised an eyebrow, disturbed by his intent gaze. She wasn't used to seeing it, but she knew that look. It was her look right before she went off to an assassination, and, for some reason, she wasn't comfortable with it on his face. Why the hell do they want me to do this? Naruto finally asked in annoyance. This one. Most likely it's a loyalty test, Anko supplied casually. A loyalty test? What the hell is that about? Every Chunin or above gets one. Part of the confirmation of rank, Anko said with a shrug. Usually though, they're only given after some event that brings them into doubt. Well, why the hell are they giving me one? They probably want to make sure beyond a doubt that you're loyal cause you defeated that Gaara punk. Still, it's not that strange, Naruto. I've had 20. And Kakashi, even he had 2. Ho. Naruto blinked looking at her. Why? I mean well, yeah, stupid as it is I get why they made you do some. 20 is pushing it though. But why him? Wasn't he, like, Unbu commander and now he's Hokage? He's got to be loyal. First one was entirely political, Anko explained sourly, nodding for him to walk with her. See, he's got a Sharingan, but he's not an Uchiha. Well, one of his teammates was an Uchiha and when he died, they gave it to him. But the Uchiha weren't happy with that story. Called his loyalty into question. That's stupid. Maybe, Anko allowed, picking up the pace. But his team was made up of geniuses, the next set of Sannin from what I remember. So, yeah, he had a loyalty test for that. Okay, so the other one. Bit more complicated, but it involves his other teammate, Rin. She was a semi-legendary medic by the time this happened, but she was caught performing some heavily forbidden medical experiments. What kind? No clue at the time. I didn't care much about other people. Anko shrugged. Anyway, Kakashi was found with her, but he claimed that he was there to stop her. Rin was arrested and made to live out the rest of her life in the maximum security level of Hayatoshi, a level that has things even Oro Sensor would be leery of. Hell, he created a few of them too. Holy crap, Naruto said with a whistle. Okay, so I can understand the reason for that loyalty test. Yeah, it was pretty suspicious, Anko agreed, grinning. Anyway, it's not so strange, is it? No, Naruto allowed before snorting. So, why'd you ask to Kakashi to give me this mission? I didn't, well, not this one exactly, but same thing, Anko allowed, waving her hand dismissively. Anyway, I wanted to do something special for you, since you got the promotion. So, I got you the mission as my version of a Kaken. Kaken? Really? Naruto asked, startled. Wow. Well, thanks, I guess. You're welcome. Oi, so you wanna help me out on how to freaking do this? I mean, we never covered assassination tactics. Good point. Okay, keep in mind, this is just a crash course, Anko said briskly as they moved to the rooftops. Typically you'll have 2 methods of entering a building, a door or a window. Sometimes there's a secret passage, so you can use that too, and they can cut out a lot of crap if you can. Right? Door, window, secret passage. Exactly. Now, if you use a door, don't enter immediately. Go to the side with the handle. Why? That's obvious, so when you open it, you can peek inside. Don't wanna get killed without checking. Now, if you use a window, be casual. Stand beside it, then see if it'll open or not. If it does, then you climb in and crouch to see if anyone heard or noticed you. Right. Naruto said with a sharp nod. Now, those secret passages, apply everything from the windows and doors to them. Sometimes they can be traps. Okay. So, there's one last way of getting in, and it's kinda cool. Basically, you have the guards open the doors for you. Ho. How do I manage that? Simple. Just get behind him without his noticing. Then follow him, staying out of his line of sight, and not making any noise. When you're as far as you need to be, you take him out, and then go on. Also keep in mind that you have to study the guards and the city itself. You can't go blindly charging around. Assassinations have to be done carefully. Unless you're ordered otherwise, of course. Check. Good. Now, then, more important things to keep in mind, Anko said with a pleased grin. Keep chakra use to a minimum, especially if you ever do this sort of mission out of country. I think you'll be fine. Bokai shouldn't has anything more than Chunin if any, and very few can sense careful chakra use. Stick with the basics, water walking and tree climbing, sunshine, and meskai. They don't produce an amount of chakra that someone other than a jonin would notice. Okay, I got all that, but oi, what do I do once I'm inside? I'm getting there, Anko said, happy to see him so eager to learn. Performing a fancy flip, she landed gracefully on top of a building and turned to look at the blonde at her side. After you've checked things out in the city, come up with an escape route before going in, cause once you're done or something goes wrong, you're gonna wanna get out of there fast. Got it, Naruto said, doing his own acrobatic move. Escape route to a fast getaway. Anyway, once you're inside the walls, find a safe point that can't be found easily, where you can rest or regroup if you need to. After that, move on. Stay away from places like barracks or dining halls and crap. If anyone sees you, they have to be taken out. Go on that last part, Naruto groused, good-naturedly. Yeah, well, I know you runt. Anko retorted with a roll of her eye, then turned serious. Now as to the actual assassination, you're going to has a small time frame to do it and get out. So, no cave bunshine in case you have to improvise. Also, you generally only has one shot, so go to the immediate kill and keep his mouth covered. Oi, immediate kill. Yeah, you has several basic and fast ways to pick from, Anko explained, ticking off each kill on a finger. My personal favorites are slitting the throat, kidney thrust, stabbing through the eye, jugular thrust, and the heart. Oh, and the temple, another safe target. Naruto was silent, gaze intent, then he looked down. Which one would you suggest? Avoid cutting his throat unless you're behind him. The blood sprays out, and the jugular is the same. The heart can be tricky, but it's a safe target. The kidney is safe too, but it can be hard to hit if you're in a hurry. The eye is iffy if you don't remember to not angle down. The temple is good, but any moron can kill by shoving a knife through. But which one do you reckon minus? Naruto, this is your assassination. You pick whichever one you feel comfortable with using. Most first-timers go to the heart or the temple. Some go to the eye. Anko put a hand on his shoulder, face serious. The important thing is this: completing the mission and coming back in one piece. Loyalty test, or not, this is still your cocoon in my book. So, make me proud. Oi, don't worry about me, Nichan, Naruto said, giving her a confident smirk. I'm the next Hokage, remember. Then, before Naruto's words registered, he disappeared in a sunshine. Blinking, Anko stood there for another minute, then smirked, shaking her head. Yeah, Tej, I remember. Crouching in the shadows of the east gate, Shino nodded dutifully to Kikyo. It was bit worrying, actually, how dominant she was becoming. The other Kaikai barely spoke anymore unless he addressed them specifically. Still, Shino found that he did enjoy talking with her more than the others. No, Kikyo-chan, I don't know where she went. Just that she went after INO, Shino said softly, allowing his gaze to drift to the few ninja around. They were going about their normal business, completely unconcerned that he was talking to a bug. After all, he was an Abaime, and all Abaime spoke to bugs. Shino, however, knew better. Oh, his family might talk to bugs, and the bugs might say things back, but they didn't as conversations. Shino did. With Kikyo and the others, he held whole conversations about everything. He had bugs that were like his friends, and Kikyo was, well, he wasn't sure, but he knew he liked her more than the others. Spotting Anko, who was grinning, and INO, who was scowling, Shino stood up to greet them. INO snorted, meeting his gaze for a moment before looking away. Anko produced a carton of dango from somewhere and began munching as she stared at them. After a moment, one of his bugs noted that she was exuding the pheromones of excitement, which according to his family was frighteningly close to mating pheromones. Shino noted the gleam in her eye and knew that something was going on that she approved of. Anko sensor, what is it that has you so excited? Where you talk about? Anko mumbled through a mouthful of dango, glaring at him curiously. Your pheromones, my Kaikaichi can smell it. They say you're excited about something, Shino explained, arching an eyebrow. Oh. Anko said in understanding, a grin spreading across her face. We got to be rank mission, pretty standard fare, actually. Basically, there's a governor who's decided to sell info to our enemies. So, what are we supposed to do? INO asked apprehensively. Trail the messenger and his bodyguard Mizukai, find out who the buyer is exactly. Then, neutralize them. Where are they headed? Shino asked, turning toward the gates. They're heading sort of northeast and are about a day ahead of us. I know that with Mizukai, they can avoid most of the patrols, but I'm pretty sure they'll has to go slow till they're further out. Well, we'll has to get Naruto-kun, INO said, frowning slightly. Now he's already out on a mission, Anko said, waving a hand, then seeing their looks, smirked. He's got an A-rank solo assassination. He got out of here about 2 hours ago. No time to waste and all that. Wait. What? INO shouted, eyes wide. He's got a. But why? His Kukan, Anko supplied with a roll of her eyes. Focus. We've got a mission, and we need to get our asses moving. So, let's go. Shino nodded then, as the older woman turned and darted out of the gates, he glanced at a stunned INO. He will be fine. I doubt anything short of another child like Gara could prove much trouble for him. I guess you're right, I'm just worried, INO admitted, joining him in chasing after Anko. I mean, this is a big mission. Solo assassination, do you really think he can do it? Yes. Shino admitted without hesitation. I believe that Naruto can destroy his heart at will. I see no reason why he would ever have trouble with taking a life. You're scared of him, INO said in surprise. No, I am just aware. He could, at any moment, turn on us, if he decided he needed to, Shino admitted with a slight nod. Unlike us. I believe he has that coldness within him. You're wrong, INO said firmly. Naruto-kun might have the coldness inside him, but he wouldn't turn on you so easily. We're his friends. You are his friend, Shino said, turning to Meto gaze. I am his teammate. I see the truth much more clearly than you can. You're wrong, INO insisted heatedly. Trust me, you're wrong. Shino sighed, then shook his head and sped up. Sometimes, it was pointless to argue with those who willingly blinded themselves. Kakashi might have been right about emotions being an asset, but so had his father. Emotions could cloud your judgment, and INO was a prime example. Naruto was not the fastest ninja in the world. Even with the Shunshine, he was not the fastest. That was not to say he wasn't fast, just that he wasn't the fastest. Case in point, he had already covered a great deal of ground, and according to the Unbu he'd bumped into a few hours ago, he'd be at Keikyoku by midnight. Since it was already getting close to sunset, he had decided to eat a late lunch and study the mission scroll. It listed several important items: the number of samurai Bokai had at his command 10,000, the number that would be stationed at Bokai's capital Keikyoku 2,000, the number of expected ninja 0, a layout of Bokai's castle, both inner and outer palaces along with the trick passages, and the real one, and the patrol route the samurai made and the time between patrols. Naruto was actually a little frightened by how detailed the scroll was. His more cautious inner voice, which sounded like Anko, told him that there was no way they could gather this much information in such a short amount of time. The part of his mind that spoke like Naruto agreed with that assessment and filed away the knowledge that they were routinely gathering information on their own people. Still, there was no information on the city itself outside of the standard layout and a comment about only one entrance. Which meant he would have to figure out how slip through unnoticed, but that could wait till he was there. Resealing the scroll, Naruto stood and with groan, set off once more. Racing through the forest, knowing better than to take the road, Naruto felt his excitement growing. This was his first solo mission, it was rank A, and it was his Kukan. He'd never expected to have a coming-of-age ceremony, though he supposed this technically wasn't one by normal standards. Not that Naruto cared about normal, all that mattered was that he had someone who cared enough to give him a Kukan. He also felt a gnawing sense of unease, because this was not just a Kukan. This was a very serious mission, with very serious results if he failed. He had to assassinate someone he had never met, which was proving difficult to wrap his mind around. It wasn't the concept of killing, Naruto had grown used to that. It was the fact that this time, he would be killing someone who was not actively seeking to kill him. There would be no way to hide behind self-defense. All Naruto could use to soothe his conscience-battered creature that it was that he trusted his orders. That this man really did have to die, now, in order to protect thousands more. So, could he actually do this? Take a life in cold blood? The answer was without hesitation, yes. Naruto could not only kill like that, he would. For Konoha, for High no Kuni, for all the people who were counting on him to ensure this man never sold another secret. Absently, he wondered how Anko and the others were doing. They had, after all, an equally important mission. Mizukai was a pushover, no doubt, but whoever the buyer was would probably be a lot stronger. Still, he couldn't bring himself to worry. After all, Anko was with them. Plus, it wasn't like the others were weak. He had no reason to worry about them. Actually, he felt a tad worried to whomever was unlucky enough to face his team. Chuckling, he picked up the pace as the sun finally set completely. Anko was not known for her patience with people, nor was she known for her understanding. So, it could be said she was doing an admirable job of faking both at the moment. Shino and INO were trying, she kept telling herself. They weren't Naruto, they didn't have his stamina, but they were pushing themselves. They were trying. That was something. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw Ino's eyes fluttering, then snap open, staging off sleep for a few more minutes. Neither had asked for a break yet, understanding the urgency of this mission. Still, it was tricky. They had to get close enough to track them, while not giving away their presence. Hence the traveling through the night and into the beginnings of daybreak. Still, if she kept this up, they would be in no condition to finish the mission. Plus, Mizuki would know his chances of getting through the patrols with a courier would be better at night. Silently cursing both to an early grave, she motioned for them to stop. "What's going on?" Ino asked, her voice doubtful. "We lose them. Now, just decided we'll rest here for a while," Anko said, glancing at the two. "With a civilian courier, they can't move very fast during the day with all the patrols. Since we need to know which country is buying their information, we can't risk killing them just yet. We could capture and interrogate," Shino supplied. "Doubtful," Anko said lightly as she sat down. "The courier would destroy any information, and Mizuki would probably kill the man and then himself." "But why?" Ino asked, sitting down as well, stifling a yawn. "Once you've been in Hayatoshi, even the minimum security level, you never willingly go back," Anko explained, glancing at the silent Abaim. "Hayatoshi is the most dangerous prison in the world. Nobody sane willingly goes back a second time." Seeing Shino finally sit, Anko settled in, knowing without words that she would remain awake as lookout. Mainly because she wasn't sleepy and partly because Anko didn't trust them quite enough to actually sleep. Producing a carton of dango, Anko began munching quietly as the two settled into sleep. Mentally, however, she was far away. She was in the first region, ruled by Governor Bokai, northwest of the center region of INO Kuni. It was where Naruto would be heading for its capital, Keikyoku. He might even already be at the walls of that city setting about his first assassination mission. Part of her worried about him and wondered if maybe she should have covered assassination more thoroughly. The other half, though, wasn't worried at all, even with his incomplete crash course. After all, she had trained him. He had the skills for this sort of mission. Plus, he was strong, he didn't need anyone. He was the sort of ninja she approved of. Also, he had training from Freya, possibly the only person Anko could tolerate to take over training Naruto. So, forcing herself not to think any more about Naruto, Anko munched away happily on her dango. As Yumeki, Naruto was not used to performing a mission alone, he had no real idea how to go about things. All he had by way of guidance was the scroll from Kakashi and the ability to ask himself what Anko would do. Other than that, he was forced to rely on the lessons Anko had taught him and his own ingenuity. The scroll, for the moment, was the most helpful thing. It had provided a city name and exact details on the amount of samurai, along with their patrol patterns, a highly detailed floor plan of both the inner palace and the greater palace and room locations. It had pretty much done all the hard work for him. All he had to do now was slip in and kill the bastard. Naruto, however, was not rushing in due to the fact that he had discovered that the scroll was lacking important information. Namely, the two INO Kuni Chunin guarding the city's only entrance. Sitting on the branch of a tree, well out of range, he watched them intently, while eating a cup of instant ramen. Stirring his noodles absently, he wondered what Anko would do in this situation. He almost winced, knowing she would kill both Chunin and go on her merry way. Sighing, he lifted the noodles to his mouth, contemplating the situation. He had confidence that the scroll was accurate about the palace. After all, he doubted Kakashi would let any ninja go with faulty information. It was the surrounding city and the ninja that were bothering him. He had no clue what was going on there, which meant it would be up to him to figure out how to get around them, create an opening and strike. "Attack when they're not looking," Naruto muttered, scowling at the city. But he couldn't do that unless he had more information on the city itself. He was immediately tempted to create a few hundred clones and send them out, but he remembered Anko's warning. "Okay, so I'll have to do this myself," Naruto said, nodding slightly as he finished his ramen. Pocketing it, he then hopped out of the tree, landing adroitly before stretching. He needed to figure out how many ninja he was dealing with. Pulling off his flak vest, forehead protector, and weapons pouch, save for a few kunai minus, he hid them. Sighing, Naruto stretched once more, turning his attention back to slipping into the city itself. Following the road leading to the city, he spotted a slow-moving group where several kids were hanging out. Grinning, he performed a shunshine. When he reached the street, he jogged up to join the group while striking up a conversation with a few of the kids. The two Chunin obviously weren't from Konoha. Most likely, they were those state-trained ninja Tsunade had mentioned. Once past them, without even a second glance, he separated himself from the group and mixed into the crowd. Right, so now it was time to do as he had so many times in Konoha when he was growing up. It was time to explore, and shoving his hands in his pockets he set off. The city actually seemed a lot like Konoha, crowded and filled with semi-rude people as they went about their day. Here and there he could see businesses and street vendors, and over it all, he could see the castle on the hill. Shifting directions, Naruto strolled down a side street. It was semi-busy and lined with older buildings and stands. Obviously, it was the old marketplace. Squeezing his way through a small crowd, he bumped into someone and stumbled. Recovering quickly, he looked around. The person in question was an attractive, slightly older, maybe 18- blonde girl with cat-like eyes. He also noticed that she had an air very similar to Anko's. She was dangerous, no matter how disarming she looked. Filing her face away for future reference, he gave her a cheeky grin and continued on his way. A few minutes later, he was on yet another side street, with almost no one around, and distracted by the sound of music drifting from a storefront. Following the music, he approached a battered-looking store advertising fortune-telling. Part of him served with interest. He wouldn't mind having his fortune read. Plus, as he gazed through the window, he could see things for sale. Maybe Anko would like something, or INO. He hesitated, though, remembering his mission, but after a moment, he decided that indulging wouldn't be too dangerous. Opening the door, he entered the store. The lights flickered across the surfaces of items, creating an illusion of movement. He almost retreated as a chill swept up his back, then chuckling at himself he moved further inside. The walls were lined with shelves of books, and moving closer, he wondered at the other items. Like the porcelain head that was divided into several dozen different regions, or the porcelain hand whose palm was covered in dark lines. He knew what the crystal ball was, of course. After all, he wasn't a total idiot. Shifting his attention away from those, he studied the books. Some of the titles he couldn't understand if he tried. Some he knew were standard fare for such a shop. After all, he was interested in the stories that featured this sort of place. His eyes drifted, then slowed to a stop as they alighted on a necklace. It was laid out on a table, among a dozen others, and yet it was the most interesting one he could see. Two dragons, one black and one white, cleverly combined into a circle. Reaching out with his finger, he briefly skimmed the surface, then promptly screamed as a voice spoke up from behind him. Ah, the Taoist symbol of dark and light, the yin-yang. He turned quickly, worried that anyone other than Anko or another Jonin, anyway minus, could sneak up on him. What he found was an older woman, gray-haired, slightly stooped-shouldered, dressed in old-fashioned priestess robes. "H. Oh, I'm sorry, dear," the old woman said, offering him a pleasant smile. "I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Priestess Savai, seer and reader." "Oh." Naruto repeated, blinking. "I didn't mean to, you know." "Oh no, go ahead, dear," Savai said, moving slowly around him to stare down at the necklace. "Each of these bring luck, safety, or good fortune. I has amulets for money, health, love, success, or 1,000 other purposes." "Wow." "Yes, wow indeed," the old priestess agreed, her long finger running over the necklace he had been studying. "I even has a mikyuvi, small pieces of paper that predict your future. However, I believe you are more inclined toward the balance." Picking the yin-yang necklace up, she ran a thumb over the surface before holding it out to him. "Take it, dear. I fear it is beyond my ability to sell it to anyone else now." "Ho." Naruto repeated blankly as he stared at the necklace, mind caught in the black and white design of dragons. "It's free," the woman explained tiredly. "The great kami and spirits of this world speak to me and say that you should receive this freely." Not saying anything, Naruto reached out and carefully took the item. The metal was smooth and cool to his touch, soothing in a way. Then, carefully, he slipped it into a pocket. Feeling as if he was released from some spell, he gave the woman a sheepish grin. "Well, thanks." "Don't thank me," the woman said pleasantly as Naruto's eyes began darting around before coming to rest on another necklace, a triangular pendant this time. Reaching out, he picked it up, reading the tiny kanji etched into the surface with a grin. "Good luck, friendship." "Oh. That's a good choice, my dear, Savai said, reaching out to guide him toward a so far unnoticed table. Shall I tell your fortune while you are here? Sure. Naruto said, allowing himself to be guided to the table. Sitting down, he shifted awkwardly as the old woman settled in across from him and made a few hand gestures. You must believe. Do you believe? Yeah. Savai paused and stared at him, then raised her hands into the air and closed her eyes. There was a hush in the room, a sudden chill sweeping over Naruto. Then, her body began to tremble before breaking out of her trance. Oh. Are you okay? I am fine, the old woman said in an odd voice. Let me see your hand. Nodding nervously, but feeling a creeping of doubt, he offered his hand up. She didn't seem any different, or in contact with anything. He watched her run a long, dry finger along his palm, murmuring to herself. Glancing up at him, she raised an eyebrow. Well? Naruto asked in mild impatience. This line represents your romantic relationships, the woman explained as she traced a series of small lines beneath his pinky. Several lines means you'll have several short-term relationships, deep ones signify marriage. You has 3, 1 deep, 1 medium, and 1 shallow. Right? Naruto managed, just barely keeping from rolling his eyes. He had no romantic relationships, hell, the closest he had was his former crush on Sakura. This line is your love line. Savai continued, tracing a medium line from the edge of his hand to the middle of his palm. It says that you can expect an easy love life. Naruto tried not to laugh, which came out as a half snort/cough. Savai glared at him and then jabbed at the next line with her fingernail. The headline, the stronger, thicker, longer, and steadier that line is, the smarter and more in control you are. Yours is straight, which means you are not spontaneous or creative. Naruto blinked, thinking about leaving this old woman to her daydreams. Obviously she was a fraud, all Naruto had to do was think about the various things she had told him. He has 3 relationships. He has an easy love life. He wasn't creative or spontaneous. Pulling his hand away, he stood. Look, I gotta get going, minus. You can't leave now, Savai said firmly, grasping his wrist tightly. Oi, let me go. No. I'm not done with your minus. Suddenly, Savai paused, her grip tightening as her body went rigid and her eyes rolled up slowly, until only the white showed. A moment later, she collapsed forward, then rose upright once more, her voice now hoarse and ancient. A great calamity, anarchy. A blood tide. It is coming, I see death, destruction, and despair. As you make Naruto. In the end. Trapped between darkness and shadow. You will has to choose. Ho. Darkness and shadow. The woman repeated firmly, her hand suddenly releasing his wrist. Shaken and more than a bit thrown, Naruto hurriedly fished to his money and, leaving far more than he should, bolted from the shop. INO couldn't help but tap her finger nervously against her thigh, eyeing the surrounding forest uneasily. After setting up the second camp, having just entered Stone Country, Anko had gone on ahead to scout around while Shino spoke with the local bug life, leaving INO, who was over alert on lookout duty. Personally, INO was more worried about Anko than some idiot who had taught her in the academy. INO had tried to be nice, had tried to talk with the older woman, but Anko was not easy to get along with. She seemed to view both her and Shino as dead weight, while INO had decided Anko was just a bitch. The last several miles had seen both women antagonize each other beyond what was normally tolerated among females. Grumbling, INO crossed her arms and wondered why she couldn't have been put on this mission with Naruto instead of that crazy woman. At least with him, INO knew where the boundaries were and what would push his buttons and what wouldn't, plus he wasn't likely to slit her throat in the middle of the night like Anko was. Glancing at still conversing Shino, INO considered the woman's parting words about maybe just killing them, to get it over with. Her tone had been at best curt, and at worst serious. INO didn't know Anko that well, but what she did know told her just how much stress the older woman was feeling. Which in turn meant that INO should back off before Anko really did kill them. A moment later, she was startled out of her thoughts as a hand covered her mouth and the edge of a kunai pressed against her throat, followed by the soft, taunting voice of Anko whispering in her ear, "Never daydream while being lookout, princess, it gets you and your team killed." INO made a noise of understanding, muscles tight as she waited for the kunai to leave her throat, which it did a moment later, leaving her free to round on the older woman and glare. "What the hell were you thinking? I could has killed you." "Sure you coulda," Anko said with a snort. "If I was some push over genin maybe. Just remember, you suck at being lookout. Oh. Ino drawled sharply, anger flashing through her. Well, I guess since you're so busy sucking other things, I suppose it's only fair. Ino, Anko offered in a slightly colder voice. I would stop now if I were you. If you were me, Ino said with a disdainful sniff, my knees would be sore from all the time I spent on them. Anko struck without warning, her hand grasping Ino's shoulder, and spinning her around so that Ino's back was against her chest, her hand lifting Ino's chin and the kunai against Ino's vagula. I'll only say this once, you snotty little bitch, Anko said, her voice dropping any hint of humanity. You keep talking to me like that and I'll cut off those little bumps you call tits and force feed them to you. Hey minus Ino started to say, trying to pull herself free. No hey, cunt, Anko hissed, the kunai pressing harder against her throat. All you say is yes, Anko-sama, and then go sit your scrawny ass down and pray, I don't decided to kill you tonight. Ino hesitated, pride screaming not say those words to fight back. Common sense and fear, however, told her to do as ordered, or end up dead. Why yes, Anko-sama, Ino choked out, sick and terrified at the situation she was in. A moment later, she was shoved roughly from behind away from Anko. Stumbling, Ino turned to stare at the disgusted minus-looking woman. Reaching up, she carefully touched her throat, alarmed to feel a hint of blood there. She wasn't going to die, but from the feel of it, she had a small cut. I've got the watch, Princess, Anko said, and this time the word princess came out with a note of disgust instead of the usual condescending tone. Ino felt her pride bristle, but saw Shino calmly shake his head in silent warning. Heeding his advice and knowing that her temper had made her provoke Anko, Ino quietly slinked away from the woman and sat down against a tree. Great, just great, she had pissed off the deranged woman that Naruto idolized. Why had she even said any of those rumors? She needed to keep her temper in check better, but Anko grated against her. There was no explanation for it, at least none that Ino could see, but Anko provoked her without even trying. Ino just didn't see why or how Naruto got along with her, because somehow she knew Anko had just put her on that private approved kill list she was always mentioning. Kami, she didn't know what to do. Taking a deep breath, Naruto slipped toward the mansion in silence, staying hidden within the shadows. A moment later, he used a pair of kunai to climb silently over the wall. Landing on a trench of water, careful to apply just enough chakra to keep from sinking, he darted along it in a low run. Mentally, he reviewed the layout of the estate. He took a breath and, concentrating his chakra, applied his Mizaigaku no Jutsu. Approaching a wall, he applied chakra to his feet and darted up the vertical surface to land in a crouch. After taking a moment to ensure that he had been unnoticed so far, he moved along the narrow wall in typical ninja style. He paused as he spotted a samurai in the courtyard, then seeing he was oblivious, Naruto continued on his way. Racing along, he noted a ramp leading to the upper palace, which was his second least favorite minus option of gaining entry. After several close calls, mostly due to his bad timing, he finally gained access to the compound and the secondary house of the lower area. Slipping inside quietly, he took a moment to catch his breath and then reviewed the map he had memorized. Mostly, all he had done was find the quickest way to do this mission with the least amount of killing, hence why he had entered the house instead of trying to take the longest route around the compound and going through the main gate. Setting out once more, he slipped through the empty house, careful to stay near the walls to avoid creaking floorboards, then found the secret passage, crawlspace that, according the map, led to a small storage shed in the upper palace. Hoisting himself into the hole headfirst, he pushed himself forward. He slid a considerable way down, then landed on cold, damp earth. Standing, he gave his eyes a moment to adjust to the darkness, then seeing as best as he could, which was just good enough to tell if he was about to be attacked, minus he set off. He could feel his pulse quickening, a tight ball of nervousness forming in his stomach. Racing along the twisting and turning passage, he was reminded of the Kumo Iki tunnels unbidden, half memories flashed before his eyes, but he stomped them down. That was then, this was now. After what felt like forever, the passage began to rise, and Naruto sped up. 5 minutes later, he came to the foot of stone steps and, careful not to make any noise, he began to climb. 100 steps later, his head thumped softly against a trapdoor. Pausing for a moment, remembering Anko's advice, he listened for any noise. Then, carefully, he pushed the trapdoor open and peered through the crack. He was in a room full of wooden crates and boxes, the storage shed. Naruto climbed out of the trapdoor and replaced it, noting that it blended perfectly with the dusty floor. Moving quietly across the room, he approached the far door on the doorknob side. Crouching, he eased it open and peered out into the night. Seeing nothing, he slipped outside. The air was cool, the stars brighter, and he wondered briefly how long had he been in that tunnel. Shrugging it off, he checked his surroundings, then his mental map. Yes, this was the right spot: 4 buildings and a small garden, just to the north of him. Slipping quietly along the side of the white-walled buildings, heading for that garden, he tried to remember where the guard that was patrolling the area would be. A second later, he found out as the samurai rounded the corner. Thankfully, since he had his Mesai Gaku in place, the samurai didn't see him. Freezing, he allowed the man to pass, then Naruto hurried on his way, rounding the same corner and coming to a stop, just in sight of his main target. It was heavily guarded, which wasn't surprising really, but it was going to prove problematic. The main doors had several samurai, and there were 2 separate patrols around the rest of the building. Frowning, Naruto performed a shunshine, slipping a hair's breadth between the 2 patrols. Then, a careful jump brought him to the balcony roof just above the samurai guarding the doors. Peering down at them, he selected a rock he had picked up before setting out to the castle and threw it at the far gate. The racket the samurai down there caused drew the samurai at the main building's entrance. Naruto grinned and, dropping to the ground, quickly slipped inside. So far, so good, Naruto thought, and then quickly pressed himself against the wall and eased forward. In the dim lighting, he spotted the expected guard with a spear, and beyond him a wall with a no mask. That was the right path, as per the so far correct scroll. Timing it carefully, he darted past the guard, reached the wall, and then headed north once more. Passing through the next door, he turned left, hurried through a room full of sleeping samurai, and came to a sudden halt in the next room. While Naruto was not the sharpest of blades, he did know that even he couldn't slip unnoticed through a room full of alert samurai. There were at least 8, maybe 9 of them, all guarding the stairs he needed to reach the last floor. The scroll hadn't mentioned them. Hell, it hadn't even been hinted at them. Worse yet, Naruto could feel his concentration slipping, which meant his Mesai Gaku was close to failing. He didn't have a choice though, he had to get through this room. Darting into the room, he allowed his Mesai Gaku to drop just as the first samurai spotted him. The man reacted swiftly, but Naruto moved with a shunshine, reappearing behind the man while jabbing a kunai into his kidney. Turning, he ducked another samurai's slash and came up, driving the kunai up through the man's jaw. Feeling more than seeing an attack from behind, Naruto twisted away from the blow and with a pivot rounded on the man and slashed his throat as well. Coming to a stop, he turned to face the other samurai, each of whom was looking frightened, but ready for a fight to the death. Naruto couldn't help but grin and perform another shunshine. Reappearing before the closest samurai, he spun, kicking him across the face. Another shunshine and he reappeared before another one, followed by breaking both knees and then the neck. Shunshine and he was in midair, nailing a third unprepared samurai with a spinning heel kick to the temple. Landing, he sensed a samurai charging from the left and threw a kunai without looking, which struck between the man's eyes, and performed another shunshine. This time he reappeared, wrapping his legs around a startled samurai's head, snapping his neck before flipping over his now tumbling body. Coming down, he slammed a foot in the last samurai's face, with a spray of blood and a sickening crunch. A moment later, he performed a forward shoulder roll and regained his feet. Heart racing, breathing as if he had just done a light jog around his neighborhood, he turned to take in the slaughter. Blood was all over the place, the bodies looked sickening in their unnatural positions. Naruto honestly couldn't decide whether he should feel proud that he had killed them all before they had even thought to call out a warning, or sick at his actions. Grin gone, he shoved his feelings far behind his mask and then, reapplying his Mesai Gaku, darted up the stairs. Entering the last floor, he paused. He could see a long hallway with a series of doors. The scroll listed those as belonging to the governor's consorts and wives, and the far door belonging to the target. Creeping into the hallway, he drew within a few steps of the room and then stopped, just barely hearing the noise of 2 people talking inside the room. At the noise of a voice growing louder, he eased himself back. A moment later, the door opened and a young woman, in a kimono, stepped out of the room. Bonsauru Bokai-sama, the girl said softly, then kneeling, set a tray aside and began to slide the door close. With a split-second decision, Naruto performed a shunshine to enter the room. Coming to a stop, he held his breath, ensuring his camouflage was still in place, then looked around the room. It was actually a very basic room, but it was definitely a governor's chamber. Seeing that the only people present were him and the governor, who was just now laying down, he relaxed slightly. He waited for what felt like forever, then, Finally satisfied that the man was asleep, he slipped a kunai from where he had it strapped and crept forward. Coming to a stop beside the futon, he flipped the kunai around, then stared down at the older man, his pot belly and his large nose. He was here. He'd pulled it off. Slipped past who knew how many samurai, at least 2 chunin, slipped into a highly secure room and was now crouched over the bed of a traitor. The governor snorted in his sleep, then rolled onto his back and smacked his lips, murmuring a name. Naruto allowed his Maizai Goku to drop once more and reached out, covering the man's mouth. Bokai's eyes snapped open in a panic, but it was too late. Naruto had driven his kunai into the man's jugular. There was a spasm as Bokai worked a spray and gargle of blood, and then the man was still eyes glassy. Naruto waited another minute to ensure his death, then silently removed the kunai and wiped it emotionlessly on the body's blanket. Blade clean, he placed it back in its holding place, then reapplied his Maizai Goku. Turning, he hurriedly slid the door open, then closed it behind him. Mission complete. Ni Yuzito reclined comfortably in the hot water of her bath, dozing as a cat might. The heat had long since seeped into her taut muscles, coaxing her toward a deeper sleep. She might indeed have slept through the night in the bath, save that she kept being pulled back every so often by a sudden flare of chakra. Or at least, she dreamily thought it was chakra, because whenever she focused on it she felt nothing. Yawning, she came out of her nap and stretched, luxuriating in the sensation. Sitting up completely, she looked around with a slight frown that had definitely been chakra and the largest spike yet. Muttering to herself, the Kumo Jonin climbed out of the bath and slipped a cotton robe over her athletic frame. Leaving the steam-filled room, she stepped into the cooler dressing area and paused, feeling another spike of chakra. Eyes narrowing, she quietly shed her robe and pulled on her pants, then rewrapped her arms in gauze before pulling on her shirt with the built-in dumai specially designed by her village to withstand and absorb most jutsu minus, then quickly retied her long blonde hair back into her signature ponytail. Finished with that, she grabbed her fingerless gloves and cloud forehead protector while marching out the door. Stopping, she glanced around the village, then at the castle a short walk away from the inn where Bokai had insisted she stay. Cat-like eyes narrowing once more, she headed that way, wondering why she no longer felt any spikes of chakra. Reaching the gate, she was confronted, of course, by samurai. "Aha, Ni-sama. What are you doing back here so late?" The one on the left asked, sounding uneasy. "I felt someone using chakra," Yuzito explained, pocketing her lightning forehead protector. After all, these idiots thought she was from Konoha, like Bokai had told them. "Well, Ryzen-san did just come in a few minutes ago to check up on things," the samurai explained with a shrug. "Maybe he was using chakra." "I don't think," minus Yuzito started to argue, until she was cut off by the alarm bell. Looking up sharply, she felt a chill sweep through her. "If you'll excuse me, Captain." She forced her way past the startled samurai. The lower palace was full of samurai running around in confusion. Weaving her way easily through them, she reached the upper palace and was unsurprised to find a much more military reaction. These samurai had a hard, vicious look about them, and, even though they knew her, they watched her intently. Entering the main building, she was greeted with even more intense samurai, some with murder in their eyes. Moving swiftly, she passed patrols that were searching the rooms thoroughly, then reached the room that connected the second floor to the first. What she found suddenly made it clear why the samurai up here were covered with so much deadly intent. Blood soaked the floor and walls, the source of which were the 9 dead samurai littering the floor in various unnatural positions. Whoever had taken them out had done so quickly and silently, judging by the fact that they were all clumped together, which told Yuzito that they had been using sunshine. So that was the flickering chakra she had felt. Frowning, she navigated the bodies and approached the stairs, where she found a local chunin she vaguely remembered being named Finger pinned to the wall by a kunai through the throat. That was vicious, cold-blooded. It reminded her of the stories about that Anko woman. Whoever had done this had been a killer, pure and simple. Continuing on, she reached the second floor, where she found the consorts and wives weeping openly and the far door flung open. Moving past the women, she entered the room and found Ryzen kneeling over the body of Bokai, his face stony. "Where the hell were you?" Yuzito ignored his question and moved to the other side of the bed, kneeling. A jugular stab, while the man was still in bed. A cold-blooded killer and an experienced assassin. Could it have been that Anko? Reaching out to cover his eyes with her hand, Yuzito's wrist was grabbed by the last chunin. "I said, where were you, Ni-sama?" Ryzen sneered. Looking up, Yuzito met his gaze calmly. Then, Lifting her other hand, she extended a finger and touched his lips. SSSH, within the space of a few seconds his lips turned black, flesh turned chalk white, and he collapsed dead. Turning back to the only body that mattered, she sighed. Closing her eyes, Yuzito concentrated on tapping just a fraction of the Nikamata's power. Her Shikyojuku was one of only 2 reasons she was given the Jonin rank. The other was her Onivutsu Shikyotaki, which belonged exclusively to her as the Vinchurikai of the Nikamata. Feeling the tainted chakra flow into her hand, she activated the Bivu-aided ability of Shikyojuku, replaying the last few minutes of the man's life. It came slowly, black and white, jumpy and scratchy, but it played out before her. His last kiss, then his falling asleep, then his eyes snapping open. Here things became blurry, but she paused at the darkened image of his attacker. Dark chakra concentrated, forcing the image to clear to her, burning out the body's optic nerves. A minute later, Yuzito had the image of the assassin, and a bolt ran through her. She knew him. He had been the kid that had bumped into her in the village earlier that day. She had marked him off as nothing more than some random kid, at most from a local martial arts school, but he had been a trained assassin. Breaking the connection, she hissed in frustration and stood. Not only had he gotten past the Chunin guarding the gates and through who knew how many samurai, he had gotten past her. She had told her superiors that she could handle this mission, that she could get Bokai back to them safely. She knew how important a defected INO Kuni governor, as powerful as Bokai could have been for lightning. She had failed. Then another part of her mind spoke up, and it said firmly that this boy must die. He had to pay for this atrocity, needed to pay because she was a Jonin, and she would do anything prove she deserved that rank. That even though all she had was her Onivutsu and the basics from the academy, she deserved to be treated equal to any other Jonin. Eyes narrowed, the young woman nodded and then forcefully marched out of the room. She knew the quickest and most secure path away from the castle, that would be where this boy was heading. Naruto knew he was being chased. How he knew that, he wasn't entirely sure. All he knew was that he had someone chasing him, and they weren't about to back off. 10 minutes ago, he had cleared the village, retrieved his various hidden items, and set out to Konoha. Somewhere along the way, he had picked someone up, and they weren't backing off. Swearing to himself, he channeled chakra into his legs and put on a burst of speed, weaving his way through the forest he had darted into. The faster he went, the harder it became to keep up with the trees and roots. He could hear the soft sound of branches swaying, the stray sound of leaves rustling behind him. Glancing over his shoulder, he frowned at the silhouette of his pursuer, then cursing performed a series of sunshines trying to gain ground. It seemed futile, however. Whoever it was behind him was fast enough to keep up with him. It looked like his only option would be to stand and fight. Then, as he came to that decision, he was forced to leap backward to avoid an exploding kunai as it whistled from behind him and crashed into the tree in front. Landing, he dodged to the left, just as his enemy sped past him. As the dirt and smoke cleared, he discovered his attacker. She was lithe, with long blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail and blue cat-like eyes. Her shirt was made up of the upper part of a black shirt and some sort of flexible white armor that was wrapped around her torso. He noted the bandages that wound their way up her exposed arms and the fingerless gloves. For some reason he knew instinctively that unlike INO, who wore them for fashion, there was a reason for this woman to be wearing those bandages. Shifting his weight silently, Naruto wondered what was going on, and where she was from. Her forehead protector sported what looked like clouds, and while he knew that meant she was from a foreign village, he couldn't guess which. Talk about annoying, he wasn't even sure what the hell to expect now. Oi, who the hell are you? Ni Yuzito, the woman said curtly, crouching slightly. I'm the 3rd strongest shinobi in Kumo. Oh. Wait a minute, you were that girl. Naruto said in surprise. So, he had been right, she was more than she appeared. Yes, and you're the poor bastard that I have to kill now, Yuzito hissed, pouncing with cat-like grace and speed. Swearing, Naruto began forming the Rasengan, then ducked as her hand made a swipe at his face, slamming the incomplete sphere of chakra into her stomach. The result was still impressive. There was a loud crack from her armor, and then she was forced off her feet and sent spinning back into the tree. There was another cracking noise, and she slumped to the ground in a heap, which left Naruto blinking in surprise. Damn, that was pretty badass to see. Walking toward her slowly, he cautiously stopped just out of her reach. He wasn't that trusting. After all, sparring with Anko had taught him a lot. A moment later, he moved back as she served up from the ground, her cat-like eyes glowing a dark purplish black. A moment later, her hand wrapped around his wrist, and yanked him into the air, before slamming him back into the ground. His body felt like it was dying, like he was going numb and cold at the same time. As Yuzito lifted him once more, he weakly tried to lift his head, but his vision was blurring. She looked so odd now, but if he focused he could make her out clear as day. Relaxing her hand, Yuzito dropped the now limp body to the ground. "You're a Chunin. Why'd they send a Chunin? I mean, I know Konoha might be a bit strained after that Chunin exam Fyakuso and the Uchiha incident. But a Chunin." Coughing, Naruto felt his body recovering and he slowly rolled over onto his hands and knees, then pushed himself upright. "How?" Yuzito murmured, taking an instinctive step back. "They sent me," Naruto managed in a slightly strangled voice, then looked at her surprised at how clear and sharp she appeared, "because I'm the future Hokage." "Who the hell are you?" Yuzito asked, staring him. Uzumaki Naruto. Chapter 29, Individual Growth. Anko came out of her nap sharply, eyes searching her surroundings. According to her cave bunshine stationed at the village, there were 2 jonin headed to the forest. She'd expected Mizukai and the courier to try and slip out unnoticed, not to the buyers to appear out of nowhere. Shifting slightly before climbing to her feet, Anko stretched, startling both INO and Shino. "Aha, it's a wonderful day for an ambush, ain't it?" "Ho?" INO asked, blinking, but staying carefully out of reach. Anko grinned at the girl, pleased at the unease INO was displaying. To think all it had taken was some playful threats to teach the girl to watch her mouth. Walking over to the small fire, Anko crossed her arms and stared thoughtfully at the flames. "We has 2 jonin level ninja headed for us, most likely the buyers. Which means we've got a serious problem, how exactly we were discovered, and why they are heading this way." "What about the courier and his escort?" Shino asked calmly as he turned his attention to her. "That's part of the problem," Anko allowed, with a frown. "If they knew about us, why not try and escape? Or why didn't the 2 jonin think to do that? Why come to us, and how can they know where we are?" "Perhaps Mizukai noticed us and informed the ninja," Shino offered. "These 2 then decided to neutralize us in a preemptive strike and save themselves future trouble." "A strong possibility," Anko agreed with a slight nod. "Of course these 2 could has killed Mizukai and the courier for being trailed and are coming here to show that Konoha ninja aren't anything." "Maybe," INO said softly, poking the fire with a stick. "They killed Mizukai and the other guy took the information and heading this direction, because it's the most direct route into Konoha." "I fail to see why they would wish to enter Hino Kuni at the moment," Shino offered. "It would make more sense to return directly to your home country to deliver the information." "Oh. But how can you be sure that info is good?" Anko said, smirking at Shino, "unless you test it." "I think INO might be right. They're heading to Hino Kuni to test the info they've gained." "Then, what of Mizukai and the courier?" "Mizukai isn't stupid," Anko said, then paused, chuckling. "Well, not entirely. After all, you don't make Chunin by being an idiot. He knows that you never give all your information up at once, you keep something just in case." "So, what do we do?" INO asked, looking up at her with a glint of determination. "I'll stay to cut off the 2 jonin. Can't let either one reach Hino Kuni. Even a little information is a dangerous thing. But I'll need help," Anko offered with a dark smile. "A sacrificial pig, so to speak." "What was that?" INO said sharply, springing to her feet. "Just an expression," Anko offered, rolling her eyes. "Look, I can fight both jonin, but at least one would break off and either follow you back to the village or go on to test the info. In which case, we lose them," Shino said. "So, either myself or INO must remain to help you keep the 2nd jonin occupied while whoever does not stay enters the village and subdues Mizukai and the courier." "Close," Anko said with a slight nod. "Mizuki's too much of a risk, he'll has to be killed. The courier is the only one to be subdued." "Okay," INO said with a scowl. "So, who goes and who stays? That's between you 2. Just remember, whoever stays will most likely die," Anko said, then watching the 2 turn to talk among themselves, crouched down to enjoy her dango and study the flames. Contemplating the brightening sky, the sun would be rising soon, minus she wondered how Naruto was doing. By all rights he should have completed his mission and possibly even started his return trip to Konoha. "Anko sensei," Shino said, glancing at a frowning INO. We feel that it would be best for me to go to the village. With the help of my Kaikeichu, I can easily handle Mizukai and the courier. Also, between myself and INO, I am the least likely to be noticed entering the village. Logical, well-reasoned, Anko said, nodding thoughtfully. Alright, get going. I'll keep the Jonin busy here, but don't waste time, K. What about me though? INO asked angrily. I'm not going to just sit on the sidelines. Don't worry, Anko said with an unpleasant smile. I'm sure one of the Jonin has a thing for young Konoha girls. Foreign ninja always do. Ni Yuzito had earned her rank through a combination of sleek, though basic Teivutsu ninbutsu, and Hoanivutsu shikyotaki. She had, until this point, been the victor of every fight she had been in. The biggest trump she had was that her lightest touch could kill anyone in an instant, a death touch that she could not control. Yet this Uzumaki Naruto, as strange as it seemed, was immune to her touch. Yuzito had panicked for a moment. Nobody had ever been immune to her touch minus, then she had realized the two possibilities. 1. The least likely, considering Konoha, was that he was Binchurikai with the Univutsu of resurrection. The second and most likely was the fact that he had some unusual bloodline limit for healing. Nimbly dodging another wind spear, which she had never encountered before now, she brought her hands together through a basic lightning ninbutsu and created a powerful clap of thunder. Naruto reacted by covering his ears, prompting Yuzito to rush in once more. Her round kick connected with his stomach, her butterfly round kick his shoulder, and the boy was left wide open to her flurry of punches and spear hands. The Chunin went down hard, but regained his feet with a simple shoulder roll. Yelling in frustration, Yuzito threw a wild punch and Naruto ducked under it. For a split second, he was visible, then he flickered from view before reappearing with a round kick in mid-attack. Yuzito managed to block the kick, but before she could counter, he planted a side kick in her ribs. Yuzito went with the force of the blow and spun, slamming a spinning heel kick across Naruto's face. The younger ninja crashed to the ground in a spray of blood, rolled to his feet once more, and turned, firing several kunai at her. Weaving her way through the hail of weapons, Yuzito snagged the handle of one and spun her blade, scraping against the one he had aimed to her ribs. Panting, both ninja froze, then, kunai scraping once more, they leapt away from each other and landed lightly. Are you done flirting now? Yuzito snapped, twirling her kunai around a finger as she stared at the surprised-looking boy. Ho. Oh, come on, Yuzito said with a snort. I'm a freaking Jonin. Runt, you think I couldn't tell you were just playing around? Well, Naruto said, smiling faintly, I was sorta hoping. MHMM. Here's a hint, try bleeding some killing intent into your attacks if you wanna fake someone out, Yuzito blandly suggested before snapping her kunai into an upright position and gesturing to him to attack. Now, let's stop with the foreplay and get to the good stuff. If you want, Naruto shot back, charging at her recklessly. Yuzito began to counter, when she suddenly felt a spike of killer intent and dodged just as a few dozen kunai rained down from all around her. Landing, she felt her eyes widen, as countless cave bunshine charged from all directions. Oh, he was good. Yuzito became a blur of motion as she fought against the cave bunshine, her touch doing the job that it was unable to do against the original. Still, it seemed like a never-ending wave as Naruto after Naruto attacked. Sidestepping one, she slammed a back fist into his face, spinning him. Almost at the same time, one of her feet came up and then down hard into another's knee, cracking it. Both disappeared in a puff of smoke, even as another came hurtling through the drifting smoke. Grabbing his jacket on instinct, she cursed, seeing the exploding note, and threw him at a group of approaching cave bunshine. The explosion freed her to deal with another one grabbing her throat. Yuzito threw an arm up, knocking his hand away, and a second later, she had slammed her kunai into his stomach. A simple side kick sent another cave bunshine crashing into a tree, followed by a knife hand to the neck, one on her right. Panting, she whipped around in time to duck under a punch, only to receive a knee to her face followed by a punch. Stumbling, Yuzito shook her head to clear it and swear lashed out with her kunai, only to as Naruto disappear, then reappear in a mid-air attack. Crossing her arms, she blocked the downward punch which the boy used to flip over her and slam a side kick into the small of her back. Stumbling, Yuzito spun, slamming a palm heel into his nose which resulted in a puff of smoke. Growing and frustrated, Yuzito gathered the needed chakra and crashed her hands together, which resulted in a flash of lightning spearing from her and destroying the remaining cave bunshine. The real one swore and then charged, forming a seal as he did. A second later Yuzuto was blown off her feet by a massive gust of wind, and she slammed painfully into a tree. Gasping, she winced, then, sensing his next attack, shot her hand out, catching his punch. "Now this," she said, meeting the boy's startled gaze as she grinned, "is more like it." Then, before he could comment, she backhanded him, sending him staggering away. Naruto righted himself and, grinning as well, charged back in. Yuzuto countered with a twist kick to his ribs, followed by a side kick. Muscles coiling, Yuzuto lunged for the wounded ninja, only to have him disappear in a sunshine. Skidding to a halt, Yuzuto felt a moment of confusion before she registered him appearing behind her. A moment later, she felt her ponytail go taut as the boy grabbed it and then jumped. "What the oasters?" Yuzuto screamed as she was literally pulled into the air and then, with blinding pain, was flipped by her ponytail and sent hurtling back to the ground. She managed to twist in the air and land on her hands and feet, hissing in rage. The second Naruto landed, Yuzuto pounced, unconsciously tapping into the Nikamata's chakra. Her now enhanced eyes registered his brief flash of surprise, her ear picked up the sound of his heartbeat doubling, and then her hand plunged into his lung. Pulling him close with her other hand, she grinned, revealing in the wonderful feeling of his blood coating her fingers and claws. He clutched at her shirt tightly, his fingers surprisingly strong, even in death, his eyes fixed on her face. Yuzuto grinned and gave him a mocking kiss before, with a wet plop, she pulled her hand free and tossed him aside. Satisfied that she had well and truly killed him this time, she turned away, only to pause. The air was suddenly hot and filled with an oppressive presence. Turning back slowly, she felt her eyes widen as she found the boy climbing back to his feet once more, tendrils of orangish red chakra coiling and twisting around him. Her enhanced eyes darted to the wound she had inflicted, and she felt her mouth go dry as it healed with frightening speed. Looking up, she found his whisker marks thick and dark, his hair bushier, and his eyes slitted and glowing red. Not a bloodline. Yuzuto couldn't help but bare her fangs in displeasure as she saw his face. Naruto was snarling at her, but it looked very much like a disturbed smile. A Vinchurikai. A heartbeat later, both Bivo-enhanced ninja charged each other. "Remember," Anko's voice hissed in Ino's ear through the radio, "don't act until I give the signal." "I'm not stupid," Ino hissed back angrily, trying to keep from rustling the bushes she was hidden in. The plan, which Anko had devised shortly after Shino had left, was simple enough. Namely, Ino hid, and after Anko had engaged the two Jonin, the Kenbutsu user was to spring out and kill one. The only problem with this plan that Ino could see was the fact that it counted on her actually managing to kill a Jonin. A Chunin, Ino felt, she should be able to manage. A Jonin seemed impossible. That was a good word. An accurate word. Maybe if she was Naruto or Sasuke, it wouldn't be, but Ino had no faith in her ability to actually kill a Jonin. 20 or so minutes later, she was forced to set her thoughts on the impossibility of her task aside. First to arrive in the clearing was a young woman, maybe a year or so older than Ino, with black hair and dressed in an odd combo of navy pants and a sleeveless black and white shirt. She was soon joined by a young man. He had the same kind of attractiveness as Sasuke, dressed in the same type of outfit as the girl. Oh, so it's Oya," Anko said, sounding amused as she emerged from the trees, munching on her dango. "Oh. It's Anko-chan," the female Jonin said excitedly. "Oi-san, it's Anko-chan." "I can see that. Sora," the young man named Oi said, a tiny smile on his lips as he causally removed the hilt that was hanging from his waist. "So, Anko-senpai, is there a reason you're so far from home?" "Oh, no," Anko said casually, flicking the finished dango stick away. "I heard that Stone Country had great dango. Killing you too is just icing on my dango." "Anko-chan, don't you remember me?" Sora said, sounding slightly hurt. "Oh," Anko said, blinking, then snapped her fingers. "Aha. You're that girl from the Chunin exams a few years ago. So, you've made Jonin." "Yep. Just got the promotion," Sora said happily, bouncing on the balls of her feet. So this is my first Jonin mission too. So, what are you doing out here?" "Like I said," Anko returned with a grin and producing a kunai, dango. "But, it's nice to see that you've managed to get over that whole 'I'm a girl, I'm only supposed to be a sex object' concept you had." "Thanks." Sora beamed back happily. "It's only cause of your test, though, that I figured that out. So, I owe you a lot, Anko-chan." "Well, Let's get started, shall we? Anko said, shifting her weight slightly to start the fight. Just a minute, I said, the hilt of his sword blazing to life with yellow lightning. Let me invite our party crasher, okay? INO blinked then, realizing what he meant, moved a split second before he lunged to her hiding spot and slashed both a tree and the bushes in half. Rolling to a stop, INO regained her feet and turned, pulling her own sword. The man smirked, shifting his attention from her to Anko and then back. Must be getting old, Anko, if you gotta rely on cheap tricks like that. Oi, Anko chirped happily, I'm going to slice your skin off in strips one at a time, letting you die only after hours of excruciating pain. Nice mental image, Sora whistled in amazement. I'm impressed, Anko-chan. INO nodded mutely, feeling slightly sick at the image she had just painted. Plus, that killer intent was so strong that even INO could feel it. Oi even looked slightly panicked, which wasn't surprising since Naruto was the only one she could see being unfazed. So can I fight, Anko-chan? Sora asked anxiously, like a little child begging. Please, Oi-san. I really want to fight her. And you can as ho, Oi said, eyes glinting malevolently as he stared at INO. I prefer blondes anyway. Tensing, INO shifted her weight to rest on her back foot while the tip of her sword rose to aim between his eyes. Whatever doubts she had, they couldn't exist now. She had to fight, and she had to win. Oi seemed to grin at her, then lunged forward with unbelievable speed, with several powerful slashes. INO ducked and dodged as best they could, unprepared for the speed of his assault. Leaping back, she channeled the chakra along her blade, and landing drove it into the ground. The earth rumbled, then exploded, forcing Oi to jump. The Jonin used part of the flying debris to change directions, and INO just barely managed to dodge as he slashed a tree behind her down the middle. Skidding to a halt, INO felt her eyes widen in surprise, realizing just how effortlessly he had done that. My, you're fast. And using such an advanced Kenbutsu style, Oi said as he stood, the sword crackling as he lifted it horizontally before his face. It's nothing though, before Raijin Ken. What the hell kind of sword is that? INO panted, eyeing both it and him warily. The ultimate weapon, it was the weapon of the Nidaime Hokage. This lightning blade can cut through anything before it, nothing can stand. Not even your new Godame's pathetically famed Reikiri or the Yondem's wretched Rasengan. Tightening her grip, INO narrowed her eyes. Her fear was now supplanted with something different, righteous fury. Oi had stolen from her family, insulted the Hokage, and insulted Naruto's dad. With a scream, INO darted forward, her sword sweeping to the side then around, the fury of her assault forcing him to dove back in surprise. Oi recovered quickly and, ducking her next slash at his face, made a thrust at her stomach. INO, realizing the danger, threw her body to the side, even as a flare of pain flashed through her. INO's shoulder and back hit the ground, but she adjusted her body through a flare of pain to regain her feet smoothly. Panting, her hand instinctively moved to her left side, where her fingers grew slick with what she knew instinctively to be blood. Wincing, she moved her hand back to the hilt of her kodachi, and stared at the man who looked mildly impressed. You are a nimble one, aren't you? Oi said, shifting his weapon around into a new position. You managed to dodge in that split second, just enough to avoid an instantly fatal blow. Let's see if you can do it again. 2v Mizukai had, upon escaping Heitoshi, known his choices were limited. How could he not, after escaping from that hell? Having already betrayed Konoha once, he had very few options. Being the bodyguard for Bokai's courier had been the top choice. It had offered him a chance at possibly joining another village. Mizukai was not stupid, he knew he was not the strongest of ninja. Oh, true, he had the potential to be great, and he had been overlooked, but he held no delusions. A moderately strong Chunin had no hope of a village taking him in, at least without something of value. Still, all things considered, he was beginning to doubt his chances. When he had learned exactly who the buyers were, he knew how unlikely it was for him to live much longer. Lightning Ninja never accepted missing nins. Even when he had seen Oi again, he had known better than to hope. Still, he had a chance. It was slim. But it was his. Oi was actually much weaker than him. It was only because of the sword he wielded that he was granted a Jonin rank, and allowed into lightning. If Mizukai killed him and took the Raijin Ken, he would stand a decent chance of living through this situation. So, while the two lightning Jonin checked that the offered information was good, Mizukai sat watching the whiny courier and planning. When would be the best time to strike? How should he do it? That Jonin, the girl, she was a wild card. Would she protect Toyo or let him die? Mizukai was patient, he waited for the perfect moment and then struck. It was one of his favorite lessons to teach in the academy, that sometimes the strongest didn't win, but the most patient. The most cunning, the one who could hold back until the perfect moment. Glaring at the courier, who was busy chewing on a pencil, Mizukai wondered at how foolish Bokai was. This man had given up nearly every piece of information with little prompting. If Bokai was planning to defect, he should have known better than select such a courier. Indeed, it had only been due to Mizukai that they had anything left to bargain with, anything to entice Oe to let his guard down long enough for Mizukai to kill him. Ugh. I thought you said this place didn't have bugs. Looking around once more, Mizukai raised an eyebrow, watching the man swat at his arm. Shifting his attention to the door, then the window, he sprang to his feet, realizing what was happening. Keikaichi. Keikaichi. The courier asked, sounding confused. Yeah, special bugs that live inside a member of the Abaime clan, Mizukai explained, shifting his stance slightly. Usually they strike well before you see them. This one is warning us. Which means Shino. Mizukai sensor, the Abaime in question said from overhead. So, I take it you got promoted, eh? Mizukai said, without looking up. He wasn't surprised, Shino had been a very talented student and one of the top graduates. Of course he would have been promoted, and only Chunin or above were sent on this sort of mission. You were supposed to protect me. The courier shouted, bolting for the door. Fool, Mizukai muttered as the man was suddenly tripped and subdued by a swarm of bugs. Finally looking up, he prepared himself for the coming fight. You know, the person I work for could always use another ninja. Governor Bokai, Shino said, is most likely dead by now. Mizukai felt his mouth go dry. Shino was not known for lying. To make things more difficult, all of the tells you could usually use to discover a lie were denied to Mizukai. Shino did not show emotion, his eyes were hidden, and his body language muted by that jacket. Can I ask who it was? Naruto, Shino said. He has become a very efficient and dependable ninja. Mizukai blinked, his memory flashing back to that night in the forest, that humiliating fight. That Naruto, that loser. He was now on such a level. Impossible, but Shino didn't seem as if he was lying. Opening his mouth to say something, he instead dodged the first attack of Keikachi. A spear of bugs scattered against the floor, and Mizukai hurled a series of sebum needles at the boy overhead. Naturally, the needles were absorbed by a wall of bugs, but that was Mizukai's plan. Turning, he abandoned the courier and jumped through the window. Landing on the street adroitly, he took off. After all, you never fought an Abaime within an enclosed space with those bugs, they could control the area. Halfway down the street, he heard the sound of Shino giving chase and grinned, leaving behind a bunshine and an exploding note. A few moments later, Mizukai heard the satisfying noise of the explosion, and he felt a tad disappointed. It had been such a simple trick. Shino should have been able to avoid it. Then, sensing an attack from the left, he dodged, watching as a spear made of bugs passed through the space he had just occupied. You've improved, Mizukai said, glancing at the boy on the left before narrowing his eyes as another Shino appeared on the right. A lot. Slipping a kunai from his sleeve, he brandished it expertly as he darted toward the one of the right, ducking under a punch, he lunged, driving the blade into his stomach. Almost instantly, the Shino he had struck exploded into a swarm of bugs and he spun just in time to avoid the other Shino's attack. Darting left, then right to avoid two more punches, Mizukai sprang forward, shudging an arm aside to drive his blade home in the boy's chest. I thought I taught you to never pick a fight with a stronger fighter. Mizukai lectured with a vicious smirk as the boy clutched at his wrist. His smirk faded, however, as Shino opened his mouth and emitted a swarm of Keikachu directly at him. Desperate, the older Chunin tried to yank his arm free, but discovered it was now trapped within the grasp of an even larger horde of bugs. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't. Mizukai's last thoughts as the bugs swarmed over him and down into his lungs was just how impossible it was for someone as strong as him to be outsmarted with nothing more than a series of bunshine made of bugs. The fight was out of control, past out of control. Flashes of blackish purple and orangish red chakra. The air filled with a malevolent, evil and cold intelligence. They had both long since abandoned their jutsu, all that existed was the physical. Naruto could feel himself losing control. He felt it both inside and outside of his body. Both in control and out of control of himself. Batting away a kick, he retaliated with a punch, only to receive a side kick to the ribs. Roaring in anger, Naruto recovered and lunged, claw-like fingers plunging for the girl's chest. Yuzito batted his arms aside and grasped his throat, her own claw-like fingers piercing his flesh. Naruto lashed out instinctively, searing her cheek with his claws, and she dropped him. Landing, Naruto spun, taking her legs out with a sweep before dropping an axe kick into her stomach. Yuzito quickly recovered and scrambled to her feet, but Naruto beat her there and brought his foot up into her face with a spray of blood. Stunned though she was, it didn't stop her from latching a hand onto his leg and slinging him around into a tree. Naruto managed to regain his feet, but Yuzito had apparently recovered and was now seemingly in a berserker rage. Naruto threw himself to the side, skidding on his hands and the balls of his feet, then darted forward, fangs bared. Weaving his way through her wild attacks, he caught her leg, and flipped himself on his side, tossing her over his shoulder. Spinning around, he charged before he had recovered and tackled her from behind. Yuzito retaliated with a sharp elbow to his ribs and then, grabbing his head, threw him over her shoulder. Landing heavily, he had only a moment to register the change, when she suddenly landed on his stomach, plunging her fingers at his face. Grasping her hands, he hissed, muscles going taut as he struggled against the girl. Suddenly pulling her arms wide and down, he drove his head up, smacking his forehead into her face. Reeling back, Yuzito shifted her weight, and Naruto struck out once more, knocking her off of him. A second later, Naruto tried to scramble on top of her, but she knocked him away with a kick. Recovering, the blonde regained his feet in a crouch, his mouth filled with the familiar taste of his own blood. Yuzito was crouched across from him, her eyes narrowed and blood coursing down her cheek and chin. There was a moment of silence, then Yuzito screamed and charged him once more. Naruto, however, dodged each of her blows, then caught a punch and twisted her arm. He heard the gasp of pain and followed up with a round kick to her ribs, then her face. He released her arm a moment later and spun, planting a reverse side kick to her stomach. It lifted Yuzito off her feet, but instead of crashing to the ground, he landed nimbly and crouched, her eyes narrowing. Naruto didn't know what was going on, only that he felt the urge to keep attacking. To rip her throat out with his teeth, to rend her with his hands. He had never felt like this, never. But it was so natural. Dimly, he felt that this had to be the Kyuubi's influence, and he struggled against it. Now it was clear, she was also a Jinchurikai, and they were both being guided by their demons to cripple and kill the other. He felt a moment of clarity, a moment as he gained control over his body. The Kyuubi's instincts were being mastered. Naruto knew it and felt a thrill. All this power was his now, no more of the Kyuubi trying to control his body. Yuzito leapt into the air with a jumping front kick, but instead found a fist plowing into her solar plexus. Her eyes went wide in surprise as the air was driven completely out of her. She hung there for a moment, and then fell to the ground, followed by a kick to her stomach, sending her skidding along the ground. She dug her fingers into the ground and, somehow amazingly, righted herself. In the space of a breath, she was charging towards him, a battle cry on her lips. Naruto stepped to the side, letting Yuzito sail by with the momentum of her charge, then turned as she pivoted, and came at him with everything she had. Naruto, however, didn't blink. Now that he was in control, he had the upper hand of this fight. His fingers flashed to the Tora seal, he took a deep breath of air and released it, backed by the chakra he now possessed. The futon, Daytopper, he remembered, was more devastating in his hands than normal. He had seen it uproot trees and snap giant oaks in half, always with a build-up or a howl of wind. The futon, Daytopper he unleashed with the aid of the Kyuubi's chakra was as far removed from the previous versions as a breezy day was from a hurricane. The storm of wind exploded into being instantly. The wind did not howl or roar, it screamed so loud that it hurt to hear. The blast of wind ripped through the air unchecked, it tore gouges from the earth, obliterated boulders, trees, and even part of a small rock outcropping that bordered on a mountain. It lasted for a good 20 minutes and, when it finally ended, there was nothing left in its path. The futon, Daytopper, had obliterated everything while blasting the very ground to glass. Naruto stared in silent awe at the sheer devastation of the attack. If he had used that in Konoha, it would have wiped out a whole block. Then the ground in front of him cracked, a series of spider webs spreading out rapidly. A moment later, a fist exploded from underground, then an arm before both leveraged against the ground to lift the owner up to reveal a battered Yuzito. Her face livid with bruises, her clothes almost in tatters. She heaved, her feet finding purchase, and then shot forward with inhumane speed, eyes blazing with rage. Naruto's heightened senses let him follow her progress. She tried to fake him out with a fake right punch but actually launched a left round kick. He reacted flawlessly, performing three things at once. He pivoted on his foot, dropped a hand to block her kick and drove a back elbow into her cheek. Yuzito dropped like a stone, but she lashed out with a kick to his stomach, followed by a front kick, which sent him sprawling backwards. Hissing, Naruto rolled to his feet and shook his head to clear it of the pain, then he felt an upswing in the chakra from Yuzito. Focusing on the girl, his eyes widened as her chakra darkened and began to take shape around her. Snapping her eyes open, Yuzito screamed, forcing the demonic chakra to materialize into the swirling, black and purple miasma of flames that represented the Nibi. Falling forward, the evil chakra surrounding her, she arched her back, taking on the appearance finally of the massive demonic cat. Naruto froze, and Nico Yuzito opened her mouth, emitting a massive ball of chakra. Naruto instinctively tried to get out of the path, but the ball slammed into him. He felt his body break and shatter, felt his skin peel. He felt his life ebbing away, yet he refused to admit defeat, demanded the power to win this fight. He wasn't sure if it was a dream or real, but he saw the massive cave and benhined at the malevolent eyes of what could only be the Kyuubi. Heard the cold biting voice of the Kyuubi whispering to him. Kukugeki. So weak. You should thank me. Naruto felt his body convulse, his flesh felt like it was boiling, his body burned hotter than anything he had ever felt. It was searing, blinding heat that consumed him from the inside out. He felt his body painfully heal, his mind, however, was disappearing. He was losing control. He struggled and fought against it, but he could feel the evil he had only vaguely sensed before, swallowing him whole. Suddenly, he was trapped inside his own body, unable to control it as his body jerked upright and then down into a crouching position. He both felt and saw the boiling red chakra surrounding him take the shape of a long-eared fox. Then, through the smoke and rubble, he reared back and hurled his arms forward, sending a pair of massive orangish red arms toward the prey, rending the earth apart as they sought her. Nimbly avoiding the attack, Nico Yuzito emitted another blast. The long ears of Kyuubi Naruto twitched and the younger monster turned and, flinging his arms out wide, unleashed a chakra-enhanced scream of rage. The blast of chakra exploded in a blinding display. Overhead, the clouds began to darken and swirl ominously. Sora was not stupid, Anko knew that much. Dodging the other woman's weapons, Anko grinned to herself. Sora definitely knew not to let her get close. A moment later, Anko was forced to race backwards as a series of lightning bolts exploded from the ground. Skidding to a halt, Anko panted from exertion. Got a new trick, ho? One of many. Sora smirked. Reitan Shikayuri was just a warning. You know, from one kunoichi to another. Thanks, Anko said, thrusting her hand forward as she released her own jutsu. Senata Vashu. Snakes exploding from the sleeve of her jacket, twisting as they plunged through the air. Sora, unexpectedly, began forming a series of rapid but calm seals. Raryudan no Jutsu. A moment later, Anko's snakes were consumed by a massive dragon made of lightning. Swearing, Anko threw herself to the side, regained her feet, and fired off a series of kunai, which were expertly dodged. Okay, so Sora had definitely earned her Jonin rank. Shifting slightly, Anko began trying to select a jutsu to counter the girl's lightning attacks. Sadly, Anko only had one, maybe two, wind jutsu. So, Anko, what you think? Have I gotten better? I'd say yes, Anko admitted warily. Really? Great. I have this one jutsu, I want your opinion on K. Sora said brightly, before flashing another series of seals. Beisu Raryudan no Jutsu. In the half-heartbeat that took to launch, Anko unleashed her own jutsu before she realized what she was facing. Anko's futon, Daytopper, clashed violently with Sora's multiple lightning dragons, which resulted in a beautiful and blinding display of light. Wow, Sora said breathlessly, staring from behind her hand. No wonder they call you Sama in Konoha, that was fast and hammy, you handled all 10 lightning dragons with one jutsu. Panting and feeling her arms tremble from the amount of extra chakra she had forced into that jutsu at the last second, Anko smiled faintly. Thanks, gotta say. That last one was definitely a killer. Top notch. Thanks. Sora beamed, producing a series of kunai. I created it myself, and I was worried it wouldn't work. Anko quickly began dodging the weapons as they whistled, though air twisting and coming perilously close to the blades. I aim Tori, Anko hissed, hurling a weighted string at Sora, strengthening the thread with her chakra to the point that it could cut through steel. Sadly, even that technique failed as Sora launched another Ryuden. Okay, this was getting tedious now. Glancing briefly at INO, Anko almost swore. The girl was bleeding heavily from her side while dodging Oi's blade. Focusing on a grinning Sora, Anko sighed. It was time to stop playing. Okay, Sora, I'll admit it, Anko said slowly, standing upright while gathering her chakra. You've gotten dangerous. I recognize you as a serious threat. Really? Sora said excitedly, like a little girl that had been given an early present. Wow, I've waited so long for Minus. But you know, Anko continued, beginning to form seals, that's not a good thing. Why not? Because it means I notice you now, Anko said coldly, finishing her jutsu. Gianto Nenten Hebi no Jutsu. A moment later the earth rumbled and then exploded as two giant snakes shot after the now airborne Sora. The younger girl looked surprised, but was professionally forming her own seals. Watching intently, impressed that the girl had grown so much, Anko calmly slipped a kunai into her hand, took aim and threw. Sora reached the apex of her leap and launched her counter to Anko's jutsu, a beautiful display to say the least, then looked around at the last second. Sadly it was too late, Anko had timed her throw just right, and Sora now had a kunai plunged through her heart. It was almost bittersweet to watch the woman's body go limp and then plummet to the ground with a dull thump. Holding back, to ensure the other woman was really dead, Anko sighed. Walking over, she stared at the limp form for a second before rolling Sora over and retrieving her kunai. And if I notice you, that means I kill you. Standing, Anko sighed, turning her attention to the only remaining ninja in the clearing. With an unnatural nimbleness, Naruto hopped to one side, narrowly dodging a fiery blast from Nico Yuzuto, and then darted in, delivering a double-fisted blow that knocked the slightly larger Mesmer cat into the air and back 50 feet. The Nico Yuzuto fell to the earth and skidded for several extra feet before coming to a stop. Its body weight shifted, chakra claws gouging the ground as it shifted the stance to distribute its weight more evenly. Then Naruto came crashing down upon it, his chakra claws slashing down the cat's chest in a crosswise motion. As the cat staggered back under the assault, the Naruto crouched low and swung himself in a tight arc, the boiling chakra tail slamming into the side of the Nico Yuzuto's chakra. The cat rolled against the blow expertly, a chakra foot slashing out, knocking the chakra fox away. Naruto twisted again in a way that no natural creature should be able to, and landed nimbly. Nico Yuzuto, however, had already launched itself at the distracted Naruto. With an almost gleeful roar, the cat's head swung in, narrow jaws parted wide. The two chakra-manifested creatures clashed with a flash of dark light and rolled together from the momentum. A moment later, Naruto used its right arm and grabbed Nico Yuzuto, and the female Vinchurikai paused as if confused by the contact. With a furious bellow, the Naruto doubled over, pulling at the same time and tossing the Mesmer-encased ninja over its shoulder. As the cat crashed down, kicking up a cloud of dust, the Naruto swung his left arm down and across. Nico Yuzuto moved with an inexplicable speed, managing to roll to one side and push itself off the ground and into a low crouch, dodging the blow as the chakra claws tore through the earth as if it were nothing. A second later, it spat forth a volley of miniature chakra blasts, causing Naruto to duck and dodge, with its abnormal speed and grace. Then suddenly Nico Yuzuto caught Naruto full-on with a blast in mid-leap, knocking the chakra fox backward through the air. Nico Yuzuto backed away with several leaps, the human host's cat-like eyes staring at the rock outcropping that had been destroyed by the hurt Naruto. There was a sudden rumble from beneath its feet and Nico Yuzuto leapt high, twisting around the twin boiling chakra arms and claws that exploded from under it. A rock cropping suddenly exploded as Naruto used its arms to grab the ground and hurl it forward like a slingshot. Nico Yuzuto was caught in mid-air as Naruto slammed into her with unbelievable force. The unexpected impact knocked Nico Yuzuto over, but with pure instinct Nico Yuzuto rolled with the movement, managing to wedge her legs between their bodies. Still rolling backwards, Nico Yuzuto heaved and bucked with all its might, kicking out hard against the chakra fox. Naruto was launched high into the air, but twisted bizarrely and using a chakra arm pulled itself back to the ground instantly. Spinning it crossed those boiling chakra arms, rearing back on chakra, encased legs and roared a challenge. Nico Yuzito roared back and then charged only too unexpectedly as QB Naruto's chakra tail explode from under the ground. It connected with the Mesmere chakra shell sharply rocking Nico Yuzito's head back. The chakra-encased ninja reeled up, then backward from the blow, but its live body swung up and over, landing lightly amidst the surviving rock outcroppings. Nico Yuzito bent her legs until her knees were almost touching the ground and then, a roar of her own, she kicked off and into the air. QB Naruto watched as she rose against the backdrop of a rain-filled sky, then launched himself to meet her in the leap. The chakra-shelled Venturikai clashed together overhead, then plummeted back to the ground with a cloud of debris. A moment later the two leapt away from each other, landing on their respective sides of the small crater they had created. QB Naruto only had a moment to study the Nico Yuzito before it was upon him, raining blows onto the chakra fox shell. Caught off guard, he staggered back, trying to ward off her attacks, then twisted, kicking her in the chest of her chakra cat shell. Nico Yuzito teetered back and barely managed to duck under a swing at its head. Unfortunately, QB Naruto's other arm curved in at the same time, chakra tearing through the chakra shell to graze the Venturiki's arm. Then, with a supreme predator's speed, QB Naruto reached out with one chakra-clawed hand and gripped her tightly by the ankle, jerking her around while his other cupped the back of her chakra shell's head, tossing her away while his right leg lashed out, and the heel of his foot crashed into her chakra shell's sternum. Nico Yuzito crashed into the earth with unbelievable force, kicking up a cloud of dust that soon turned to mud in the storm. The female Venturikai heaved itself upright once more, but both paused in their fight, staring at the other. A sense of something filling the air, a type of anticipation that escaped words as both Venturikai realized something fundamental. Then, with a roar, they lunged into the climactic battle that would have left many minor hidden villages in shambles. INO panted, dodging and weaving her way from the grinning pretty boy attacking her. The hair on the back of her neck was standing on end from the amount of lightning in the air. Kami, as if fighting a jonin while wounded wasn't bad enough, it had to be a freak that knew the fire country style of kenbutsu and wielding a blade that could cut through anything. Oi slashed at her, forcing INO to drop and kick at his legs. The jonin jumped, allowing INO to throw herself into a backward roll. Regaining her feet, hand darting to her side, she hissed in pain, eye closing slightly. As long as I wield the Raijin Ken, you has no hope of beating me. Oi bragged, twirling the blade through the air. INO had a sudden epiphany, realizing the only solution to the problem. Yes, as long as he wielded that blade of lightning, she couldn't beat him. The solution, then, was to make it so he couldn't hold the sword. INO narrowed her eyes, hands tightening around the hilt of her kodachi, and then shot forward, darting right, then left to attack his flank. Oi dodged at the last second, eyes wide, as he started backpedaling frantically. INO didn't let up once, ducking or weaving through his wild attacks, but always driving him back. His Raijin Ken struck nothing. INO was moving too fast, reading him too clearly. She would have marveled at this, but she was busy. Vision blurring, INO ducked a wild downward chop, then her kodachi flashed out, neatly severing flesh and bone in a spray of blood. INO was moving, even as the hand holding the Raijin Ken sailed harmlessly through the air. A half-heartbeat later, his other hand followed. Oi screamed, crumpling to his knees, his mouth slack, staring up at her in shock. INO, however, stumbled, the blinding pain in her side overwhelming her senses. Her head swam, her arm felt so heavy. Gritting her teeth, INO managed a final slice, and the older ninja toppled over headless. INO tried to laugh, but her fingers went slack, allowing her kodachi to slip away. Then, suddenly, she hit the ground with a thump, her side filled with a burning pain. Her mind drifted for a moment, then snapped back into focus as Anko's face came into view. The older woman was staring down at her casually, a kunai twirling around her finger. INO opened her mouth to say something, but decided not to waste the energy on the bitch. Anko seemed oblivious to this as she knelt at her side and, using a kunai, sliced away the pre-existing bandages around her wound. Oh, not too deep. INO couldn't help but yelp as she felt Anko prod her wound with a finger. You won't be dying, but that's gonna leave a scar. What? INO managed, breathing through her teeth heavily. But medical jutsu doesn't leave scars. Medical jutsu. Never learned any, Anko explained as she pulled a kunai out and began forming a seal. All my focus went into how to kill things. You're just lucky I know how to cauterize wounds. See, cauterize. Ino mumbled, then watched in mounting fear as Anko breathed out a small ball of fire at the kunai, until it seemed to turn darker. The blood loss slowed her thought processes down just enough that she didn't realize what exactly Anko was planning, until the woman turned to her with a sadistic grin. "Now, this is going to hurt a lot. But I won't enjoy this," Anko said, her grin growing as Ino screamed when the searingly hot blade came into contact with her skin. "Okay, I lied. I'm enjoying the hell out of this." Thrashing, Ino screamed, her throat raw, then felt a hand slam into her chest and pin her against the ground. "Stay still, otherwise it'll just get worse." Whatever part of Ino's mind that constituted Ino retreated from the searing pain. She screamed for what felt like hours, until finally, the blade was removed and her body reported the burning pain fading. Breathing heavily, Ino stared sightlessly at the brightening sky overhead, tears coursing down her cheeks. It was almost like being born again. When Ino finally came back to herself, the first thing she felt was someone gently bandaging her side. Lifting her head, she stared at the woman who had just tortured her, putting the final touches on a bandage before sitting back. "So," Anko said, raising an eyebrow curiously. "Can you talk?" Ino hesitated, thought about what to say, then decided on the only suitable response. "Ow. I said the same thing." Anko chirped happily. Freya hated the rain. It had rained when Tsunade started dating Dan. It had rained when Orochimaru, his best friend at the time, became a traitor. It had rained when the Yondem died and when his first book flopped. It had even rained during Sarutobi's funeral. It was raining now, pouring down, all across the rocky countryside. The Sannin, however, was focused on the massive amount of chakra he felt being tossed around. It was not normal chakra. He knew that sort of chakra from his years of experience, and he was rushing toward it. The frog he was riding, not Gamabunta, who was temperamental, but a strong enough toad that could make extremely fast time. "Oh Nisai, how much longer?" "One more hop," the large toad croaked back, heaving itself high into the air. Freya winced as the rain struck his face rapidly, then whistled as the toad began to descend. After landing, the large creature disappeared in a puff of smoke, and the toad save dropped expertly to the ground. For a moment, he felt nothing, then an unbelievable amount of evil intent washed over him. Hurrying through the sparse forest, he leapt to the top of a large boulder and froze, mouth gaping open. There to the left was a miniature orangish red one-tailed fox made of boiling chakra, and to the right was a slightly larger purplish black one-tailed cat made of swirling chakra. Naruto, and pausing he searched for the memory of the name of the Kumo Din Churikai minus Yuzito. Nico Yuzito lunged, her chakra claws extended, but QB Naruto slammed her aside with an arm made of chakra, then slammed his other hand into her, pushing her deep into the side of the nearby mountain. A moment later, QB Naruto was forced to dodge as a blast of some sort emerged, landing on a boulder where he managed to change his momentum as no normal ninja could. He leapt aside of the blast, rebounded off an overhead outcropping and dropped like a stone on the emerging Nico Yuzito. The girl managed to twist inhumanely as well, throwing him to the ground, but QB Naruto managed another impossible feat and twisted her around, shoving her back into the side of the mountain. Nico Yuzito somehow managed to grasp the orange-flamed Naruto and threw him to the ground, where he rolled to his feet and pivoted in one motion while sending a chakra arm hurling at her. "No, no, no," Freya murmured, kneeling, as he began rummaging through his ceiling materials. He had to do something. They were close to the northern border between Kusa no Kuni and Konoha, which was the only space between Suchi no Kuni and Hai no Kuni. The patrols on the Great Wall would undoubtedly feel this, and ninja could arrive at any moment. Plus, even more importantly, Naruto had no experience at this level. The QB could easily overwhelm his personality. Sensing something, the Sannin looked up and swore Nico Yuzito was airborne and firing an energy blast at his general location. Grabbing up his materials, Freya jumped, hit the ground, rolled several feet, then stood. Turning, he watched as the boulder he had been on, along with the surrounding landscape, was obliterated. "Damn," Freya muttered, turning his attention back to the brawling chakra animals. QB Naruto slammed one of his massive red hands into the chakra cat, sending it flying again. Nico Yuzito rebounded, landed easily, and emitted another blast of chakra at her target. This time, QB Naruto didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and hunched before flinging them wide and screaming. There was a loud explosion as chakra blast hit chakra scream, forcing Freya to cover his ears. Then the world went white from an explosion. As the light receded, Freya squinted through the brightness and felt his mouth go dry. Naruto had his hand outstretched, guiding the massive chakra arm into making a trench in the ground while carrying a weakly struggling Nico Yuzito backward. Then, the girl was slammed against a large rock. Repeatedly. Freya knew instinctively that this fight was over. The Nikamata's chakra was flickering in and out with each slam before it went out completely, as the girl's head dropped forward. Turning his attention to the remaining Jinchurikai, Freya prepared for the worst, but instead found the boy pressing one of his hands against the side of his head and snarling. "I'm not a demon." Naruto screamed as the boiling chakra flickered. "I'm not the QB." The snarl turned into a pained expression as the boiling chakra began to dissolve, and Naruto collapsed to his hands and knees. I'm Azumaki. Naruto." With that, the blonde promptly collapsed in a total heap. Silence filled the air, as if noise had been eradicated. Hesitating, the large man created a cave bunshine to check on the girl. Then, creating another cave bunshine, he hinged it into a three-sided tent before quickly moving to check on Naruto. Rolling the boy over, he frowned. Naruto was bleeding from the ears and nose, unsurprising, considering the sheer amount of willpower it took to forcibly suppress such chakra without training. Actually, Freya had never seen a Jinchurikai do that without training since during the first major manifestation of the first level, the Bivu overwhelmed their hosts. Shaking it off, he lifted Naruto's shirt to reveal his stomach and the now minus glowing seal it contained while forming the one-handed seals. Taking a moment to study the seal, he frowned while applying the imperfect Gogi Fuin. Settling back as the QB's chakra and influence were disrupted complete, he scooped up the runt and carried him back under the tent. Making a fire, he sighed, turning to study his other cave bunshine, who was tending to the girl. What had the Yondem been thinking, modifying that seal in such a way? The Shisha Fuin and Shiki Foldin were obvious, one to seal the demon and the other to allow Naruto access to the power minus, but that last one, the Hakno Fuin Shiki, seemed to act as a sort of merging process or binding. It was as if the Yondem had been trying to tie the QB's being to that of Naruto. Why bother though? It was a pointless minus. Then suddenly, Freya realized the only explanation. It was brilliant. It was also a very despicable thing to do. The problem with Jinchurikai was that when they died, unless the Bivu was transferred to a new host, it escaped. This process tied, merged, the QB to Naruto's soul so that when Naruto died, the QB would as well. The Yondem had found the only way to actually kill an immortal demon. Naruto would in essence be the ultimate Jinchurikai in every sense of that word. Pushing that aside, along with the consideration of whether he should tell Naruto, he eased himself up once more, heading to the girl and the cave bunshine. Coming to a stop, he considered her, then flashing through a few seals he summoned a medium-sized orange-brownish toad. Kneeling, Freya carefully inked a memory modification seal on her forehead. Lifting his fingers, he activated the seal and then nodded at the cave bunshine to cover her exposed hands before placing her on the toad. "Okay, Isugama, take her back to Lightning Country, but don't let yourself be seen, understand?" "Shouldn't the runt bring her back though?" Isugama asked, staring down at the Sanin strangely. "Normally, I'd let him. It'd be a big feather in his cap," Freya explained, shaking his head, "but she'd get turned over to Ibikai-kun, who might evidently break through the memory seal I put on her. I can't risk that because she knows something about the brat that is his private business." "Aha," Isugama said in understanding, and then a croak later, the toad was gone and Freya sighed, collecting the sealing supplies that he'd dropped earlier. Moving back under the tent and shivering from the heat of the fire, he began a complicated sealing process. 20 minutes later, he finished his scroll before applying his chakra, pulling in every ounce of the evil, intent and demonic chakra that tainted the area. He rocked back as it finished, sweating and feeling as if he had been immersed underwater for several hours. After that, he carefully put the scroll up. Such concentrated chakra and evil intent could be used as a weapon later. Overhead, the rain abated slightly as he shifted through his materials and began penning the first page of his newest book. The basic concept was simple: boy meets girl. Boy meets girl's twin sister, chaos ensues. Humming along, he flew through the first half-dozen pages before a low groan made him pause. Turning, he looked over at the groggy ninja as he sat up and cradled his head. Naruto made another noise of annoyance, then coughed. "Finally awake, eh?" Freya asked, turning back to his new book. "Eh? Iro Senin." Naruto mumbled, looking up in surprise. A moment later, Naruto sprang to his feet and looked around in confusion. "Ho! Where's she at? You didn't. After you went through the trouble of sparing her life?" Freya snorted. Now, I got one of my frogs to give her a lift back to lightning. After I made sure her hands couldn't come into contact with him. Why? Ho Onivatsu, your brat, the Shikyotaki. Ho what? Naruto repeated blankly, sounding totally out of it. Onivatsu Freya repeated slowly, a unique brand of jutsu belonging exclusively to Vinchurikai. Vinch minus. People that has a bifu sealed inside them, Freya sighed like you remember. Anyway, Onivatsu are unnatural abilities for any human, including the advanced bloodline clans to possess. Since they come from a demon, they're termed Onivatsu. What makes them unnatural? Take that girl you fought, Yuzito. Until she met you, every single person she's ever touched has died instantly. Gaara. His sand grants him a nearly perfect defense, making it near impossible to damage him. Oh, Naruto said, lowering his eyes. I'm lucky, then ho. I don't has any Onivatsu. Actually you do. A very powerful and perhaps the most unnatural one of the lot, Freya explained, climbing to his feet to stretch. Your bloodline, Tenkei Kia, I've had Tsunade look at your medical report. It's not healing you, it's regenerating. No matter how much damage you receive, you can't die. Tsunade. I can't die. I needed her opinion, and she thinks it's a Kyuubi chakra-influenced bloodline. Gave her just enough truth to let her create her own conclusions. Freya said, sitting back down, then, pausing, he shook his head. I should explain it differently. It's not that you can't die, it's just extremely difficult to kill you. Take an instantly fatal blow, or try to use more Kyuubi chakra than your body can handle at one time and you'll die. Ah. Naruto said, before frowning. So, I'm pretty much immortal. Baka. Freya said. You are not immortal. Not even close. Just because you're harder to kill than most doesn't mean jack. However, it is extremely unnatural and hence, an Onivatsu. Okay, Naruto said slowly, scowling. Oi. Why didn't Yuzito use any jutsu though? I mean, she had a lot of chakra, right? I mean, I know some use a lot of teivatsu. But shouldn't she has minus? Vinchurikai never taught jutsu outside of basics, Freya sighed. Since they're supposed to be super weapons, normal techniques are deemed pointless. The kicker is that practice makes the super weapons failures. Weapons, Vinchurikai. You talk like they're not human, Naruto said slowly, looking up from the fire to meet Freya's gaze. Those words dehumanize and degrade. That, Naruto, is a matter of perspective, Freya said with a long pause before continuing. Think of how most people in Konoha view advanced bloodlines, then realize that in other villages they are viewed at best as second-class citizens and at worst utter trash to be brutally eradicated. It's not the same, Naruto said heatedly. Why not? Because it's not. Naruto said forcefully, with a scowl. Well, you are sort of right. Advanced bloodlines, even in the villages that hate them, are at least considered a type of human. Vinchurikai are treated as nothing more than weapons, permitted no family or friends. No children, total isolation. However, never think that the suffering of one group outweighs the suffering of the other. Neither led happy lives, nor are either truly accepted by the village they live in. Konoha accepts the bloodlines. That's because Konoha is different than the other villages. Freya paused, mulling over whether he should continue or if he should just call it a night and get Naruto back to Konoha. So, would they reject me? No, Freya admitted after a moment. You'd be treated differently. They wouldn't view you as a hero anymore. Your journey to Hokage would become nearly impossible. But Konoha would, ultimately, accept you. Prejudice in Konoha is a tricky thing, don't risk it until you has no choice. I'll tell them one day, Naruto murmured, lowering his gaze back to the fire. A Hokage should never lie about what he really is. That, Naruto, Freya said, startled to hear Sarutobi's words to Orochimaru echoed through this young boy, is perhaps the wisest thing you've ever said. You're not gonna be sick, are you? Huh? Naruto managed, coming out of his thoughts, to look down at the massive toad he was riding. Now, just thinking. Well, we'll be close to Konoha soon. The toad said, leaping into the air, with very little effort. Great. Naruto murmured, drifting back into his thoughts. He wanted to be Hokage so badly, would be Hokage, but would that be possible once the village discovered his secret? A large, vocal part of him wanted to keep it quiet, never to reveal what he was. The villagers would hate him, no doubt, and picturing Ino's face if she found out made him sick. Of course, she might not care. Anko certainly hadn't, and Freya treated him like any other person. There were special cases, though. There was no promise that INO or even Oka would accept him if they found out. Another part, the part that kept him moving toward Hokiv, told him he had to tell them. The village and all of those he counted as important to him, they deserved to know what he truly was. Like he had told Iro Senin, no Hokiv should hide the truth about what he was. So, Naruto knew, beyond a doubt, that he would tell everyone. How and when were open to debate. All he knew was that it would be before he gained office. Who knew, if the kami smiled on him they might not care. But that was foolish to the point of lunacy. Sighing, he resolved to shut this, as he had with all problems that would snap him if he dwelt on them, deep behind his mask of normalcy. Coming out of his thoughts, he realized that the village walls were in sight, and he grinned despite himself, patting the toad's head. Oi, let me off here. I wanna walk back. If you say so, the toad rumbled, landing with a heavy jump to allow the boy to hop off its head and land on the ground. Turning, Naruto gave it a thumbs up. Thanks for the lift. No biggie, the toad said in response before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Turning, Naruto set off at a brisk pace, whistling a vaunty tune, wondering how Anko and the others had done. Pausing briefly in a clearing with 3 posts, he grumbled at the memory of waking up tied to one. That had been a long time ago, but it was still in his memories, and for some reason Naruto kept reminiscing about the past. Forcing it aside, he set off once more, muttering about stupid masked perverts and their books. Coming out of the forest, he paused, watching 4 figures emerge from around the bend. Squinting in the moonlight, he thought at least one of them seemed familiar. Eyes widening, he grinned and waved a hand. Anko. Hey. Naruto. She called back. What the hell are you doing? Oh. Saying hi. Naruto answered as they drew close, flashing a smile at Ino, tossed a nod at Shino and wondered about the apparently unconscious man being carried by an Anko cave bunshine. Well, what if we were enemies? You'd get yourself killed revealing your location like that. Bow, I'm Uzumaki Naruto. Like I'd let myself die, Naruto bragged before grinning wider. Besides, who'd wanna pretend to be a psychotic bitch like you? Probably someone that wanted to get little pricks like you, runt, Anko shot back, smiling herself. So has fun on the mission? Naruto asked, glancing from her to the others, and then back as the group started toward the village. Well, Anko mused, gesturing at Ino with her stick of dango. Princess killed a jonin, which was pretty funny to see since she nearly got herself gutted doing it. The bugger back there killed Mizukai and captured the courier, and I of course had a nice workout, and then took a nap. All in all, not a bad vacation. Naruto blinked, sweeping his gaze over them all before focusing on Ino. You killed a jonin. Of course, Ino sniffed haughtily, flipping her hair as best she could with its length as they reached the gates. So Anko's not drunk and making things up. No, Ino said, narrowing her eyes while Anko grumbled. I really killed a jonin, named Oi. Are you sure he was jonin? Don't you think I could do it? Ino snapped angrily. Ahaha, well, it's not that, Naruto said, trying to calm the girl down. I just mean, well, it's just really impressive, and usually Anko tries to hog all the good fights for herself. So, you think I can kill a jonin? Ino repeated firmly, gaze not wavering. Of course. Naruto said, then, at her tiny smile, he couldn't help himself. If they were drunk and blind. What? Ino shrieked, causing Anko to snicker and Shino to sigh. What do you mean what? Naruto repeated, smiling. You really need to learn when you're being teased, Ino-chan. And you, Naruto-kun, need to learn when not to tease me, Ino said threateningly as she reached for her kodachi. How about you two save the flirting for after we're in the village, okay? Anko said in annoyance. Flirting. Ino shouted. Naruto, however, launched immediately into an attack. Anko, of course, happily returned the favor. The gate guards that had been watching in amusement whimpered at the chaos. Chapter 30, Emerging Consequences. So, after all that, I ran into Iro Senin. At first I was gonna just ignore him, or maybe try to hitch a ride back on one of his toads. Then I remembered how Anko grumbled about a mission report after Kusa, so I figured I might have to make one. Only I didn't know how, so I bugged him to show me. Which he did. Kakashi supplied in amusement, but only after he did his research. Exactly. Wait, how do you know? Naruto asked, confusion on his face. I used to go with him on those research trips when Yondem was busy, Kakashi answered, by curving up happily. Oh, Naruto said with a roll of his eyes. Just what those women needed. Two perverts peeking on them. Two heads are better than one, Kakashi said pleasantly. Anyway, as of now, you're officially on inactive duty for your training trip. Right? Naruto said, deflating slightly. Now I just gotta figure out what to do till tomorrow. Go on a date, Tenzu suggested helpfully. Sure, Naruto deadpanned. And right after that Sasuke can grow a pair of wings and beat Anko's old sensor. Just go relax, Naruto, Kakashi offered, chuckling at the mental image. Grumbling, Naruto turned and left to try to do just that, leaving the three ninja alone in the office. Another minute passed, then Kakashi glanced at Danzo, his humor gone. So, did he pass the test? I suppose, Danzo said evenly. The council should at least be pleased with the results. He did an outstanding job for a first time. I think it's an outstanding job, period, Kakashi countered, eye drooping. He managed to complete his mission despite the lack of intel on the Jonin. Not only that, but he also learned which village this Jonin hailed from, which, even if we didn't as Anko's prisoner, would provide us concrete information on who exactly was buying secrets from Bokai. True. However, he did have to kill two INO Kuni ninja and several samurai. Self-defense, Kakashi said amiably. Besides, as long as they weren't fellow Konoha ninja, it doesn't matter who he killed. Of course, Danzo agreed blandly. So, not only did you fail your mission to provide us with a very valuable INO Kuni official, but you were defeated by a mere Konoha Chunin. Yes sir, Yuzito said. Eyes focused straight ahead as was demanded of her, not looking at the Raikid. The office was empty and rather boring indeed. The only thing that gave it any sense of personality was the window behind the Raikid's desk, which overlooked a portion of the vast lightning field that surrounded the village. Were you unable to get within range? The Raikid asked sharply. No sir, Yuzito said firmly, forcing her temper to stay in check. I made contact with him several times, skin to skin. Well, then, kindly explain how you failed. Your touch kills everybody, as you've proven when you killed your family and your genin team. I would dearly love to know how a walking ninja of death can fail to kill. I don't know how it happened, Yuzito said, careful to keep her urge to shout in check. There was nobody more infuriated or upset than her. This threw her usefulness to the village into question, and that usefulness was the only reason she was still alive. All I know, Raikid-sama, is that he seemed resistant to my shikiotaki. Resistant? The Raikid said with a contained fury. Of course. How silly of me not to realize that someone could be resistant to a touch of instant death. Of course that answers everything. It is possible, Yuzito said tightly, using all of her willpower to keep from looking at the raging cage, especially since he managed to do so. Do you take me for a fool? The Raikid exploded, fist slamming into the desk. The only possibly person that could ever prove resistant to your touch might very dimly be Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto. Yuzito repeated, recognition setting in even as she looked at the Furious cage. How did you know his name? It was in the report, our spy supplied of noteworthy Konoha ninja, the Raikid said, reining his temper in. Are you claiming that the Chunin you faced was named Naruto? That was what he claimed, Yuzito said, her hands tightening behind her back. Blonde hair, blue eyes, whisker marks. That is the description our spy supplied, the Raikid murmured, sitting back, his anger apparently forgotten. Yuzito studied the man for a moment from the corner of her eye, then resumed her stare out the window. Mentally, she was praying he would be too stunned to notice her lapse in protocol. Raikid-sama, would it be possible for me to see the report they supplied? I may encounter him again, and I would like to be better prepared next time. Yes, of course, the Raikid said thoughtfully as he glanced over her shoulder. I trust you know where to go. Yes, Yuzito said with a bow, turning to leave, only to be brought up short by the cage's next sentence. In light of events, I believe you can be spared the punishment for your failure. However, you did break the law when you looked at me. Therefore, you will arrive at the Tudai at 1900 hours for your punishment. I believe due to the nature behind your breaking of this law, a mere 15 is fair. Yes, Raikid-sama, Yuzito said tightly without turning, and then, at his dismissal, continued out of the office. Once in the hallway, she took several deep breaths, mastering her anger and loathing for her looming punishment. If she had been anyone else, she wouldn't have been punished. It was only because she was a Jinchurikai that she was required to not look at Irakid. Setting aside her anger at such unfair treatment, Yuzito set off to the room detailing the foreign villagers. Pausing just down the hall, she placed her hand against the special seal lock and flayed her chakra. The seal glowed for a moment, then subsided, allowing the door to open so she could enter the small office. The room was cramped, the walls filled with several bookcases holding books, scrolls and folders. In the center of the room was a small table and a chair. Closing the door behind her, she approached the cases devoted to listing intelligence gathered on each foreign village. Getsu, Hoshi, Kamri, Kiri. Yuzito paused, a grin forming on her face. Konoha. Another moment was spent scanning the intel folders that were divided by names. There was Uchiha, and then, grabbing the one labeled as Uzumaki, she turned and set herself at the table. Opening the folder, she paused to check the semi-blurred picture of the boy. Yes. This was the same boy she had fought. Crossing one leg under the other, she propped her chin in hand and began to read. Name Uzumaki Naruto, age 13, hair, blonde eyes, blue distinguishing features, whisker marks, family status, orphan. Standard fare for a report. Yuzito sighed, then continued on. Recently graduated from the academy after repeated failures. Apprenticed to Mitarashi Anko, then transferred to Team 10. Again boring and standard, and slightly disappointing as well. He had failed the academy repeatedly. How could someone like that ever defeat her? Completed 2B rank and 1A rank missions successfully. Freshly promoted to Chunin. Single-handedly defeated the son of Jinchurikai minus. Yuzito paused, then reread the last line. He had beaten Gaara. Without help. It should have been impossible for anyone other than the Raikid, or the Hokage to defeat Gaara. Has a goal of becoming Hokage. Held in high regard by a few noble Konoha clans after his defeat of the son of Jinchurikai and by all minor clans for his stance of shinobi equality. Rumored too, has an advanced bloodline called Tenkeikia, allowing for instant healing or possibly regeneration. Yuzito paused, her mind barred by something. There was something nagging at her, something just beyond her grasp. Frowning, she tried to figure out what it was, before realizing that her memories were being tampered with. The only reason for that was a memory seal. Closing her eyes, she took a breath, and flared her Nico chakra, pushing against the seal as she had been trained. It was unusually strong, but then it shuddered and finally broke. The seal gone, her memories came rushing back, prompting her to remember that Tenkeikia was not an advanced bloodline. It was an Onifutsu. Naruto was a Jinchurikai for the QB. Opening her eyes slowly, she stared at the paper, then at a nearby pen. It was information that needed to be shared. Yuzito reached out to the pen, then hesitated. Why should she rat out another Jinchurikai? Because of her loyalty to the Raikid. Ha, that was a laugh. This whole village despised her, and the moment her usefulness as a weapon was over, they'd extract the demon and seal it into some other child. The cycle would be repeated, and Yuzito, despite how much she wanted to prove her usefulness as a weapon, wanted no part of keeping this village safe. Closing the folder, she stood. Against her better judgment, Yuzito was going to keep Uzumaki Naruto's secret. Roka sighed, settling in at the ramen bar. He was greeted by the semi-frosty glare of Iame's father, then gave his sheepish order to the part-time waiter. Left alone, the school teacher slumped slightly, praying that Iame's test came back negative. He really wasn't ready to be a father just yet, although with his luck, it would happen. Shifting his thoughts away from his personal problems, Boka focused instead on his students and in particular Konohamaru. The young boy had at one point been very popular among the other students. Somehow, this had changed, even Konohamaru's former friends no longer liked him. More frightening was the fact that Konohamaru didn't seem to care about his sudden loss of popularity. The boy was throwing himself instead into his studies. Boka had even caught the boy trying to practice something from the material intended for older students. He was also studying the human body in a way that was disturbing. It was unnerving to see someone so young so focused on such things. What worried him more, however, were some of the dangerous similarities that were emerging between Konohamaru and Naruto. Boka, admittedly, hadn't spent much time with his former student lately, but what little time he had spent told him Naruto was changing and not for the better. At least, not in Urga's opinion. Still, he would keep such opinions to himself. Mainly because he knew that in Konoha such things would get back to Naruto and he would hate to hurt his quasi-brother/friend in such a way. It still didn't mean that Urga felt safe, with Konohamaru picking up some of those traits. Shaking it off, the school teacher offered a brief thanks to the disgruntled old man who set his ramen down and then, after subtly checking the poison, hesitantly started eating. Grimacing, he glanced at the old man who was glowering at him. Urga considered that maybe it was time to think about finding a new ramen stand. At least, until a hand slapped his back and a familiarly loud voice shouted his name, disrupting his thoughts and causing him to start choking. "Oi, oi, you all right?" Naruto said, swinging around to stare at him worriedly. Nodding, Urga frantically forced down his noodles and gasped for air. Naruto beamed happily and hopped onto the stool beside him. "Great. Then you can buy me lunch, right?" Wait a minute, Naruto. Urga managed, still trying to recover from his near death by way of ramen. Or come on Urga. We haven't had lunch together in forever, Naruto said, looking around the stand before his smile slipped. "Hey, where's INO-chan?" She's at the doctor's office, Urga managed, clearing the last of the noodles from his airway. "Oi, is something wrong with her?" Naruto asked in concern. "No," the chef said, looking over at them, a ladle in his hand. "She's just getting a test, because of an over-enthusiastic boyfriend." "Ho. Who's her boyfriend?" Naruto blinked, looking around in confusion, then, noticing Urga's awkward face, grinned. "Urga. You and INO-chan." "Oh. Yeah, just recently," Urga admitted, scratching the back of his head, acutely aware of the chef's glare. "This is great. If you marry her, then I can has all the ramen I want for free." "Now wait a minute." Both Urga and INO's father shouted in unison. "Oi, so I guess I should order a lot now, ho." Naruto grinned impishly. "Naruto," Urga shouted before pausing to look at the entrance, where INO had entered, a happy smile on her face. The school teacher, being a ninja, knew without words what that meant. INO, her dad said slowly, almost nervous. "What did they say?" The girl's smile grew slightly as she looked from her father to Urga, then to Naruto, then back at her father. "Twins." Urga froze, stared at her as the word sank in, and promptly toppled over. Her father clutched his chest and stumbled back, knocking over the pots of ramen. Naruto cried out at the loss of his precious food. Urga, thankfully, passed out. The air was damp, rich with the soft songs of cicadas and grasshoppers. A secret song just for those who could truly appreciate the music. Such as the young man dressed in the grey, high-collared jacket crouching amidst the tall grass. It was a very beautiful song in Shino's opinion, and he was happy to be able to listen to them once more. Even Kikyo and the rest of his Kaikeichu seemed lulled by the songs, which meant that Shino felt even more relaxed than normal. Eyes closed, he began to doze, mind drifting to the mission and to his team. It was so odd in the dream how easily he viewed each of them as part of his family. Anko was like the crazy woman you knew was related to you, even though you weren't precisely certain how. INO was the sister you both loved and found amazingly annoying, and Naruto. He was the sister's boyfriend, but still family. Still, part of Shino felt uneasy at the absence of the hive that guided the clan, the soft soothing voice that gently reminded all a BAME that they were unique. That there was nothing to fear. That even when they were gone they would be remembered. Yet, it was gone, and part of Shino felt very uncomfortable with that development. He snapped out of his dreams and subconscious musings quickly, the air now silent. His Kaikeichu were already moving, swarming through the grass and bushes, relaying to him that his father was approaching. That his father's bugs were responsible for the silencing of the song. Standing slowly, Shino turned to face the older man, who was now standing only a few feet away. It was a strange moment. Shino definitely felt something was different between them. What that was exactly he wasn't sure, but it was there. "Father." Shino Shibi intoned, not moving or revealing his emotions. "We must discuss a very serious matter." "Of course," Shino said, as Kikyo whispered what the others told her, that his father seemed hostile. "What exactly do we need talk about?" "Of certain developments that has garnered the attention of us and the others of the clan." "Developments? You has begun to avoid us and the others of the clan. Your Kaikeichu hive is isolating itself as well. This is causing unrest and worry among us," Shibi said, his voice holding a faint inflection of unease. I did not mean to cause unrest or worry among the clan, Shino said, silently ordering his Kaikechu to fan out and prepare for an attack. However, certain changes have forced me to isolate myself. Define changes, Shibi said carefully, an eyebrow arching ever so slightly. I has begun to accept that emotions are in certain situations an asset. I feel closer to my team than to the clan, that they are my family more than you and the others, Shino explained, listening to Keiko's silent support. I can no longer hear the hive. You can no longer hear the Abriame hive. Do you mean the Kaikechu hive that lives within you, or the hive that guides all Kaikechu and Abriame? The Abriame hive, Shino said carefully. I am unsure why, or what this could mean. Just that I no longer feel comfortable among the clan. The Abriame are one mind, with one voice. Shibi paused, his tone hesitant. However, there are times when a new Abriame hive is created. You are very wise to avoid the Abriame clan now, two hives cannot exist together. Even now, my Kaikechu are insisting that I settle this between us. I see, Shino said, his own Kaikechu swarming high into the night sky, shifting and swirling, angry at the threat. And will you? No, Shibi said, turning away. We are interested in why a new hive has been created and in the possibility of two hives coexisting. Shino nodded, calming his Kaikechu, in particular Kikyo minus, and then recalled them to himself. After a moment of silence, in which things felt different between him and his father, Shino spoke. I am interested as well. I has never heard of this. Since the founding of Konoha, there has been only one new hive, Shibi said, turning away completely. Shortly after the beast attacked Konoha, a new hive was created. And it was destroyed. I see, Shino murmured to himself, lowering his gaze slightly. Could this be because of the Kumo Iki? What, then, of Naruto's chakra and its strange allure for his Kaikechu? To understand this, he would need to understand his clan's origins better, but the only way to do so would be to enter the clan home and retrieve the scroll kept secret within his father's study. We will see you later, Shibi said, disappearing into the forest. Shino stood there feeling as if he was on the cusp of death and the future. He felt a moment of panic, then at Kikyo's soft assurance that things would be fine, he sighed and quietly walked in the opposite direction. His father might have been willing to allow him to live, but the others in the clan would not. Which meant Shino needed to find a new place to stay and to listen to the songs. I agree, Kikyo-chan, Shino intoned, disappearing into the forest. Things are changing. Azuki Yoyuge watched the girl carefully, studied the way she flowed and shifted through her form. There was no denying that INO had talent, it was a rather difficult form. Yet, Yoyuge also knew that the girl was pushing herself too far and too fast with those scrolls. Hayate's style needed to be properly taught. She'd cleared it with the Hoku and Anko, INO's current sensor. Allowing the girl to finish the form, the Unbu captain stepped into the clearing, impressed to find the girl turning at her presence. Yamanaka, Yoyuge said, then seeing the flash of recognition in the younger girl's eyes approached. Azuki, right. Yes, Yoyuge said, coming within arm's reach of the girl. Glancing at a nearby scroll, she frowned slightly, then looked back at the girl. So, INO said, raising an eyebrow, is there a reason you're here? Yes, Yoyuge said, unsure of how to approach the subject. She hesitated, then remembered how Harate had first approached her about going out. I wanted to talk about your fight against Roy, but would you mind if we sparred a little first? Ho. INO blinked, then went wide-eyed. Well. Sure, if you want. One rule, however, no dances that you might have learned, Yoyuge said, drawing her sword. Why not? Kenbutsu is about more than dances. It's true that even my own style has variations of them, Yoyuge explained. However, I wish to see your skill with the blade. Okay, INO nodded, lifting the blade slowly into a ready position. Yoyuge watched her opponent carefully, drifting naturally into a defensive posture. INO shifted her weight, the tip of her kodachi drifting slightly before she darted forward. Yoyuge easily parried each of the younger girl's slashes, then sidestepped, lunging for INO's legs. The genin nimbly back minus flipped away from the attack, landed cat-footed and advanced on Yoyuge with impressive speed. Her blade was barely a flash of light, as it licked out and then back in, yet Yoyuge blocked each attack. Silently, the Unbu was assessing INO's skill. The girl had a natural skill with the sword, and good balance and timing for a beginner. No wonder Roy had been killed by the girl, INO was the better with that sword than some people twice her age. Definitely room for improvement, but Yoyuke conceded that INO was impressive. INO lunged to her stomach and Yoyuke parried the blow, only to realize that she had been faked out and the girl was actually slashing at her throat. Instincts flayed and Yoyuke dropped to a knee, spun around INO and regaining her feet, spun around leveling her blade against INO's neck. Wow, INO breathed, turning to stare at her in surprise. Yoyuke slowly eased her sword away, but mentally she was replaying that moment. For this girl to create a believable enough feint to catch Yoyuke off guard, that spoke a lot of the girl's potential. So that was why Harate had been so set on teaching INO his kenbutsu. INO-san, a sword is only a sword. It is the wielder that makes it dangerous, Yoyuke said slowly, sheathing her sword curtly, and while I am impressed with your level of skill, I believe you should no longer teach yourself. What? Why not? Harate-sensei gave me those scrolls and taught me Tsukiyo-dori for a reason. INO protested heatedly, eyes narrowing. Yes, he did. However, kenbutsu requires more than solo practice. You must spar, to hone your instincts, and you need someone that is much stronger than you so that your skill will improve, Yoyuke said, lifting a finger to point at the blonde. You are very talented, but Oa was not a true kenbutsu user. He was really strong, though, INO said defensively. Yes. And yet you are here, and he is dead, Yoyuke said without inflection. Skill can overcome power, but only if it is honed and gained properly. I knew Harate and I know his style. I believe he would rather I train you until such time as you are fully ready to learn the skills in those scrolls. Train me? Yes. I came here after hearing of how you defeated that Oi to ask you to become my apprentice in kenbutsu. Yoyuke paused, crossing her arms, wishing that she could ignore the girl. But Hayatsu had asked this of her, and she would do as he wanted. If you decide to accept my offer, you first agree to limit yourself to the first scroll, until I feel you are ready for more. Secondly, you agree to follow my instruction without question or hesitation. I don't know. INO mumbled, shifting her weight awkwardly. Indecision was all over her face, and Yoyuke sighed. Think about it, and when you decide, come to the UNBU headquarters and ask to me. INO nodded and Yoyuke walked away without making a noise. She was improving, but it was slow. It was hard to guess that she was the main branch heir, especially when she battled against him. Still, she was improving. Nevi supposed Hinata might be a decent match against Hanabi now. Ducking a strike at his head, Nevi spun, sweeping her legs. Hinata managed a sloppy shoulder roll and regained her feet, hands in position once more. Pausing, Nevi took a moment to focus on her. There was a hint of exhaustion, but that had been there since before the start of the match. She had been pushing herself a great deal, inspired more and more by Naruto. It wasn't too surprising, really. Naruto seemed to have that effect on people. Her posture was good, solid, but he could see the weaknesses. Her eyes strained, attention lapsed. This fight was over. Hinata suddenly charged, flashes of chakra filling the air, as the two Hyuga clashed once more. A palm heel was gracefully turned away, a kick neatly avoided, another palm heel deflected. Nevi lunged his own palm heel aimed at her face, only to as it deflected his kick stopped, another leg sweep avoided. On and on they went, Nevi ever the proper branch member, allowing Hinata the dignity she was due in this sparring match. Still, dragging the match out any longer could be considered an attempt at humiliating her. Striking out, aiming for a tenketsu, Nevi just barely registered the change in his opponent's style. Ryuken was a graceful soft style aimed at damaging the internal organs. It was characterized by sweeping blocks to deflect and light touches from an upright stance. Hinata, however, had dropped her stance deeper and her block had struck, not deflected. Most importantly, her strike had not been light. Hinata's hand had upon impact, coiled into a fist and driven a great deal of concentrated chakra into his stomach. Nevi recoiled, eyes wide, allowing Hinata to follow this with another attack from the unusual stance and then another. Losing his balance, Nevi hit the ground, rolled and then regained his feet with a sweeping motion. His ribs felt broken, at the very least cracked. His stomach felt as if it had been punctured and his arm felt shattered. Flexing his fingers, he was relieved to find it whole, but staring at Hinata, who was looking timid, he frowned. Hinata-sama, may I inquire as to what you used against me? Hinata shifted slightly, rubbing her fingers together, blushing. Amatsu Anafai Ryu. It is the original version of the Ryuken. It combines both external and internal damage using chakra to enhance the external damage. Where did you learn it? Nevi asked slowly, a sense of wonder flickering through him. There was a scroll, in the main branch library. It's been untranslatable for a long time, but since I wanted to improve myself, I tried to learn it. I used my Byakugan to study the few pictures without being caught and I've never used it before. Nevi said, gingerly touching his ribs. I believe it is quite devastating, Hinata-sama. Properly used, I believe it could truly be something to fear. Are you okay, Nevi-san? I am fine, Nevi allowed, and I respectfully remind you that it is improper to refer to me as such. I am branch family, Hinata-sama. INO, of course, Hinata said, sounding disappointed. INO, how is your father? Healthy as ever, Nevi allowed, knowing partly why Hinata was interested in his father's health and constantly tried to treat him so familiarly. Years ago, there had been a delegation from Kumo trying to establish firmer ties with Konoha, yet that had been a cover for an attempt at kidnapping Hinata. Her own father had of course stopped the attempt, but the Kumo delegation had attempted to demand Hayashi's head for the insult. His father had offered to offer his own life up instead, however, Konoha had responded violently. The Sandaime had ordered that all the heads of the lightning ninja be sent back to Kumo, with the threat of all-out war, if they tried such an underhanded tactic again. So Hinata felt she was much too ventral in Nevi's opinion, minus that she was in both his and his father's debt. Merely because his father had willingly faced his inescapable fate. All branch members were destined to die to the main branch. Hisashi had explained that to Nevi, and Nevi had taken it to heart. Ayana, Nevi-san. Can I ask you something? As you wish, Hinata-sama, Nevi said, keeping his sigh of annoyance from escaping. So far, he had yet to stop Ho from referring to him as Nisan. What were the tune-in exams like? I mean, the first two. Hinata paused, sounding uneasy. They were difficult, but nothing too dangerous, Nevi explained, raising an eyebrow. I believe you could easily handle them, if you desired of course to take the exams. I wanted to. Shikamaru-kun and Shovi-kun did not see a reason. Oh. Then of course you respected their wishes, Nevi guessed, finding her timid nature slightly annoying. Hinata-sama, if I may be so bold, I would suggest you make it clear that you would like to attempt the exams. Force them if necessary. Politeness is useful only to a point. But I can't. I believe that you can, Nevi offered firmly with a nod. If it is your destiny to fail or to pass to take the exam or not, those of course determine the outcomes. But you must, if there is something you desire, apply your whole being into attempting to discover the destiny that awaits you. Thank you, Nevi-san, Hinata said, bowing slightly, then paused, giving him a curious look. Is that why you are allowing Tenten-san to pursue you? Nevi blinked, staring at Hinata in surprise. Well, that was unexpected. I am sorry. That is none of my concern, Hinata offered with another bow. If you will excuse me. That said, the heiress quickly turned and departed the training yard. Nevi blinked once more, then sighed, heading to the branch family compound. Apparently Hinata had learned not only a new style, but also how to read people much more clearly. If he was to meet Tenten to their training date, as she had called it, he would need to wash his hair and of course be treated to his wounds. For some reason, he didn't mind that he would have to explain that they came from Hinata. Amatsu Anavai Ryu, it somehow seemed fitting for her. There was an unexpected strength in both, and he wondered how long it would be before anyone else discovered that fact. Perched high over the village, intently munching her dango, Anko listened to the faint noise of the village drifting up to her. They were all so happy and alive. Did any of them even know what it was like to suffer? Part of her wanted to teach them, to go down there among those happy complacent villagers that had never made a sacrifice minus. She forcibly stopped that train of thought, knowing that it led to nothing good. It never had and never would. But it was part of her. Because she hated them, then of course, she also envied them. What would it be like, she wondered, to be normal, not to have to kill or inflict pain, to find satisfaction? Then her hate would flare, her fury at the thought. Why should she have to wonder? Why should they get to be so happy? Why was it her, only her, that was stuck on the outside looking in? Family and friends denied to her, a life outside of being a ninja forever beyond her reach. Only Anko reminded herself it wasn't with Naruto she had a source of normalcy, a sense of belonging that she had not had since Orochimaru. Maybe they weren't related by blood, but they were as good as family, and if he were just a little older. Finishing her latest stick of dango, the deadly kunoichi paused, sensing the not-so-subtle approach of her former lover, the current Hokage. Tossing her stick aside, Anko produced a new one and wondered what exactly he had to say to her. The Hokage came to a stop just to her right, hovering just in her peripheral vision. Kakashi. Anko. A beat. Need something. Well, that is generally why you seek people out, Kakashi said happily, his eye curving up. Looking at him curiously, Anko raised an eyebrow, taking a slightly vicious bite out of her dango. Well, I figured you'd be thinking about giving up teaching, since Naruto's gonna be leaving for a while. How do you figure that? Anko asked, giving him a calculating look. Kakashi might seem flaky, but he had been Unbu commander and was now Hokage for a reason. Well, Sandame did force you into teaching in the first place, Kakashi explained brightly. True. But it's not so bad. Anko admitted thoughtfully. Though, I would love to pick my own students. Well, in that case, there's a new teaching position opening. Kakashi said, producing a scroll casually. The current person in charge of the Unbu trainee program is being reassigned if you're interested. So I get to torture supposedly high-level, badass shinobi. Yup. Even get to design part of the test that allows them entrance to the program. Sounds good, Anko admitted, taking the scroll. Great, well. Now I gotta go talk with Danzo. I'll see you later. Kakashi said with a small wave of his hand, before disappearing in a sunshine. Whistling, Anko broke the seal on the scroll, her stick of dango paused halfway to her mouth. Hesitating, Anko briefly read the scroll, then finished her food and tossed it away casually. Scanning the details more thoroughly, she couldn't help but smile viciously. Finally, an S-rank mission. It was going to prove tricky as hell, too. Not only was she supposed to train the Unbu recruits, but she was supposed to assassinate the current leader of Root. On its own, that would be difficult enough, but she had to do it in such a way that it would be taken as an act done by one Uchiha Itachi. No wonder Kakashi had come to her and not summoned her to his office. This was definitely volatile information. Resealing the scroll, she set it aside, allowing the erasing seal to work. Musing softly, she stared out over the village and at the setting sun. So, how exactly could she kill the man and not have it linked back to her? Each assassin had their own unique signature, and faking someone else's would prove very tricky. Anko, however, was the best at assassination. The woman was confident that above all else, she could fake Itachi's style well enough to be undetected. Producing a new stick of dango, Anko sighed, feeling a sense of dread fill her. Tomorrow would be the last time she saw Naruto for 3 years. 3 years was a long time, a lot could happen, and, knowing Freya, there would be no contact in that whole time. Climbing to her feet, Anko stretched, then nodded decisively. The closet thing she had to family was leaving tomorrow, and she was going to need plenty of ramen dango and sake to see him off properly. The name Sabaku no Gara invoked certain images and words. Words such as insanity, murder, and demon. Images were of course more telling, a pair of haunted green eyes, an emotionless face, the maniacal grin he wore when crushing people with his sand, a slow and deliberate gait when he approached. Temari knew these images and words, along with many more. She had grown up with Gara. He was, in her opinion, the most insane person she had ever met. More than once growing up, she had prayed to his sand or for someone to kill him. Yet, underneath all of that was the weak bond of family. He was her brother, and part of her wanted to cry over him to offer some comfort for him. Now, finally, she could. As he lay sleeping peacefully, for the first time in his life, she sat on the side of his bed stroking his forehead, as her mother used to do to her. Ever since that Konoha ninja, Uzumaki Naruto, had fought and sealed Gara, the village had been peaceful. There was no demon attempting to consume her youngest brother's mind, no nightmares. It seemed, indeed, that the only drawback was his inability to use his sand as easily. In Temari's opinion, however, she could deal with a Gara that seemed human now and not quite so homicidal. A Gara that occasionally called her Nisan instead of Temari or Seigo, in reference to the order in which he would kill her. A Gara that was more brother than monster. Looking up, She paused, narrowing her eyes on the man she called father. The man stood in the doorway, staring at her and Gaara coldly. He was upset that no one in the village could as yet figure out how to unseal Gaara. Konoha's sealing system had always been above and beyond other villages. "What do you want?" Temari asked curtly, ready for anything. "Nothing," her father said, eyes hard. "This changes nothing, he will kill you." "Oh. I know he'll kill me one day. After he kills you, Kankuro, the rest of this village. And as you make Naruto," Temari said, climbing out of the bed to approach the door. "All I get, father, is the distinct satisfaction of seeing you die first." That said, she slammed the door in his face and sighed. Turning, she saw those green eyes silently staring at her, and Temari quietly returned to the bed. Sitting down, she hesitantly reached out to stroke his cheek. He stared up at her, emotions unreadable, and then slowly closed his eyes once more. Temari continued to stroke his face, silent tears coursing down her cheeks. 2 rapid seals, Uma and Tora, a deep inhale of breath to mix with chakra, then a sharp exhale. The darkened training area grew bright as the crackling stream of red and yellow flames exploded outward before becoming a sphere of flames. It lasted for several long minutes with a slow but steady growth until finally it died away, leaving an unnatural warmth in the air. "Not bad," Anko said, reclining against the tree finishing a stick of dango. "I think it's time we moved on from the katan, Gakokuya no Jutsu." "Right," Naruto said, frowning slightly as he considered the previous jutsu. In compassion, the futon, Daytopper had been cakewalk to performing that Gakokuya, but he wasn't sure why. Not the required chakra, or the seals, but there was just something about it that made it seem more difficult for him, but he could forget about it for the moment. Turning, he faced Anko, waiting for the older woman to finish her dango and teach him the next technique. She had shown up a few hours ago, just after sunset, and dragged him out to a training field. Her explanation had been last-minute training before they had a farewell party, because she would not be seeing him off tomorrow. He felt a little disappointed at that, but Naruto understood it would be difficult for her. It was hard on him as well. He actually felt closer to her than he ever had Oka. Still, he didn't have much of a choice in the matter. Akatsuki would not care about anything but getting their hands on him, so he had to leave so that he could get stronger. Strong enough to protect everyone precious to him. "You know," Anko said after a moment, staring at him oddly, "you didn't turn out half bad." "Ho." Naruto managed, blinking, unsure what she meant by that. "It's just, Naruto, I was never intended to be a jonin sensei. My world, all of my skills, they are geared toward death. But, Anko paused almost thoughtfully. "I trained you the best I could, taught you the best I could, and Naruto, you've made me proud." Naruto blinked slowly, staring at the woman, feeling a tightening in his chest. It was weird. Anko had never talked like this, never said those words to him. He wanted to say something, do something, but he could only stare at her in confusion and surprise. "So," Anko said, looking away, staring off into the distance, "I just wanted you to know that. It's not much knowing that, but minus. Not much." Naruto echoed hollowly, unable to believe she would honestly believe that. Seeing her look, he moved his mouth in silent words, then finally managed to speak. "Anko, it means a lot to me. Even if you don't think it's worth much to me, it's precious." Anko just sort of stared at him, then looked away quickly, a sort of awkward silence settling over the clearing. Naruto stared at her, though about hugging her, but knew it would not be a good idea. Still, it felt so weird, just standing there not talking and waiting for something to be said or done. "What I'm going to teach you now," Anko finally said, turning her gaze back to him. "I never wanted to teach you. I promised myself to never teach you any jutsu my sensei taught me, but now I have to." "Why?" "Because I need to know that if the worst should happen, you'll at least have something to take them with you," Anko said, crossing her arms to stare at him intently. "But you have to understand what I'm going to teach you. It's not to be used unless you has absolutely no other choice. None. As in you're dying and they're a threat you has to stop at all costs. Right? Got it? Only use it on Orochimaru or Akatsuki." Naruto said, then at her hard look held his hands up. "Boy, I get it, okay. Naruto, this isn't something I ever wanted to pass on. It's kinbutsu, and if the Hokage ever suspected I taught it to you, I'd be in an unbu cell waiting to transfer to Hitoshi. Don't worry. I won't ever use it." Naruto swore, with such sincerity that Anko sighed. Suva Susai no Jutsu, Anko said slowly, as a rankan has been forbidden because of its dark nature. This technique involves you forming a special hand seal using the target's own corresponding hand. Then, you change your chakra from positive to negative and that's the end. Ho. Naruto managed, face scrunching up thoughtfully. Your chakra in its neutral state is positive. When you forcefully convert it to negative and it touches an unchanged chakra, the result is a suicidal explosion of both you and your enemy. Anko said, then paused, sighing. The larger the sources of chakra, the bigger the explosion. If I performed it with sensor, we'd take out about a mile around and leave a crater about 5 feet deep. Wait. Hold it. This thing can destroy things for a mile. Well, Anko said, temporizing. Actually, the explosion from me and sensor would only take out a 12-foot radius. But when you invert your chakra like this, it causes a chain reaction. And everything has chakra. Naruto said, eyes widening as he got the implication. If he understood it right, then this move was definitely not a thing to use lightly. Seeing her expectant look, he gulped, asking the question to confirm his thoughts. So your explosion would cause other things to explode until what? It ran out of chakra. Like setting off a series of blast notes. Until your negative chakra was used up. Actually, Anko corrected mildly, don't worry about it, Tej. I'm just going to show you how to change your chakra and the hand seal. Hopefully you'll never have to use it. Tej. Naruto asked then at Anko's slightly embarrassed look at being caught calling him her younger brother. He grinned. Henichan worries too much. Runt. Pisaho. They know you're behind Unity. Of course they do, Danzu said, reading the report in front of him. Are you sure that this is what Uzumaki said to Tsunade in the forest? Yes, sir. My dad died killing the fucking QB, direct quote. The root ninja paused. Danzu-sama, if they know about your involvement with Unity, then surely they'll try to assassinate you. Of course they will. The current Hokage is the former Unbu commander after all, the grizzled war hawk said dismissively as he turned his attention to another sheet. So, Hiyoshi's private report confirms that the Yondem is Naruto's father. Yes, sir. And you're sure that the Yamanaka bitch is the great-great-niece of Tsunade? Yes. I see, interesting, Danzu mused softly, then looked up at the gathered ninja. Our main priority right now is trying to gain more supporters and sway public opinion. I imagine after all that happened, it shouldn't be too hard, but I want immediate surveillance on Sarutobi's grandson, and Tsunade's niece. What about Uzumaki? And Asuma? Even Tsunade? Tsunade isn't going anywhere, besides she's worthless to any of our plans. Asuma would most likely resist any seals, and Uzumaki is leaving for a training trip with the Freya. Danzu leaned back in his seat, studying them. Of course, when Naruto comes back, it'll be a different story. No matter how strong he is, Will has people even stronger. Yes, sir, the group intoned in unison. Then, one of them carefully spoke up. Danzu-sama, the assassination attempt. I expect Anko will be handed that task. She is the only one Kakashi can trust after all, Danzu said simply, scowling for a moment before grinning slightly. I believe a memory seal could prove useful, and then she could join us on her back, of course. At the amused and interested chuckles, the man gestured for them to leave. Once they were gone, he scowled in deep thought, knowing that he was actually in a very precarious position. Anko would not be so easily defeated. He understood her curse seal, her connection to Orochimaru. She had a proven track record of breaking seals, though sheer bloodlust, which meant he would have to get her neutralized another way. Then there was Naruto. That boy was strong. Maybe too strong, if he could overcome such a powerful opponent as the son of Jinchurikai without aid. When he came back from his training trip, there was no telling how strong he could be. Yet, Naruto could not be killed like so many other potential threats. The boy's connection to the Yondem and his own personal status within the village made him a very powerful tool for Unity. To control Naruto would require not brute strength, but controlling those that he cared about. The Yamanaka girl and Anko were the most likely targets. He couldn't help but chuckle, wondering why the strongest were always so easily controlled. Chapter 31. Goodbyes and Dawnings. The crowd was vast. It was, perhaps, the single largest gathering of people in Kusa's history. With the internal strife of the daimyo's assassination by their own ninja and the external war with Hidden Rain who had backed the traitors, the throngs were ready to hear his words. Standing before them staring out over the sea of people, Hitori raised his hand for silence, which amazingly came in an instant. My people, my friends, my family. I accept with humility and honor the great burden of promise that you has conferred upon me. I accept with deep resolve to do all that I can to this nation to bind us together into one voice and one people. For a peace that we deserve. The regent now daimyo paused, sweeping his gaze from person to person, reading the crowd carefully. In performing my tasks as daimyo, I will need your support. Your unwavering loyalty, your encouragement, and of course even your criticism. The dangers we now face are difficult, but we can accomplish them. Together, as one people united behind a common goal. He was stopped short as the people began to applaud, and he waited till it was beginning to taper off to motion to silence once more. So much of being daimyo was about timing, and Hitori had excellent timing. Seeing the crowd's expectant faces, he turned serious, continuing his speech. We has removed from our ranks those who has betrayed us, we has declared our goal boldly. Today marks the beginning not only of a new administration, but of a people achieving the justice that others might deny us. Let word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of our people. The cheers exploded, and he allowed them till they reached their natural crescendo. Sensing it was time to continue his speech once more, Hitori raised his hands wide, calling for silence a final time. Seeing the faces staring up at him, all so happy and confident, he lowered his arms and looked down. I beg you, however, not to believe this shall be easy. Keep in mind this saying that my father once told me, when I was very young: things in life will not always run smoothly. Sometimes we will rise toward the heavens only to has it change, and we will fall. I promise we will reach the heavens, and if by chance we do fall, we will has done so with total honor and nobility. At the murmurs and grumbles he sharpened his voice, meeting the crowd's gazes firmly. I know what I tell you is not what you wish to hear, but it is the truth. If we stand firm and united, then we shall not fall. For our children and their children and their children, we must unite. We must has unity. Unity. The crowd screamed back in affirmation. Hitori grinned, looking at his people. How easy they were, how blind, how trusting. I promise you, my family, that as the unifying voice for our great people, I shall never allow our nation to fall from the path we have chosen. Then, he raised both his arms and uttered his chosen cry. Kusa. Hitori-sama. Unity. Kusa. Inoichi hummed softly to himself as he expertly set about fussing with a specially ordered flower arrangement. Normally he allowed his wife to deal with the Moribana style, but since she was out and Ino had yet to learn it, Inoichi was left to the task. Not that he minded, in all honesty, he found it almost meditative. Dad, Ino said from the doorway leading to the front of the shop. Yes, honey. Inoichi responded, fussing with the shin branch. It didn't look quite right, and he paused, tilting his head slightly as he studied the appearance. I wanted to ask you something, Ino said, coming to stand beside him. About a friend. Inoichi said absently, moving on to fuss with the so branch now. Well, this friend, they act really strange, Ino explained, reaching out to fiddle with an unfinished arrangement. 1 minute they're normal, for them at least, then the next they're utterly insane. Define insane, Inoichi said, biting his thumb thoughtfully as he studied his Moribana arrangement. Insanity is not exactly a descriptive term in this village. I know that, Ino said defensively, glancing at him. But, well, they get really scary, and when you look in their eyes you see something wrong. Wrong. Yeah, it's like they've minus. You mean Naruto, don't you? Inoichi said, glancing up with a small smile at her stunned look. Honey, just because I'm a dad that doesn't mean I'm stupid. Fine. Fine. So Naruto sometimes has this wrong feeling to him. This look that he's got something extremely dark inside him, Ino said, finishing her flower arrangement. I know he's not cold-blooded, but he seems like a killer, Inoichi summarized, looking at her with a raised eyebrow. How many times has you killed? 3 times, Ino admitted reluctantly. Now then, has you enjoyed the 3 times you took a life? No. Very few ninja enjoy taking a life, at least in Konoha, Inoichi explained, looking at her intently. Naruto is the apprentice of Anko, isn't he? Yes, Ino said, fiddling with a flower arrangement tool. Anko enjoys killing. Death makes up a large part of her life, and how she relates with others. But, to function among us, she can't be bloodthirsty all the time, so she pretends to be a normal ninja to an extent. She's created a persona of normalcy to fit in. So she really is psycho. Pretty much, Inoichi admitted, crossing his arms. Which makes her the perfect ninja for assassinations. But what does that have to do with Naruto? Everyone's personality, to a large degree, is influenced by your sensei and parents. Naruto has no parents, so his entire personality is dictated by his sensei. So, Naruto likes killing. It's not that easy. Inoichi sighed, choosing his words carefully. Even a thick-headed moron could tell his daughter liked the boy. He might be starting to. But I think, like Anko, he's creating a persona. One that will let him enjoy it without guilt, something that will block everything he feels and let him be the killer Anko really is. Shino said that Naruto could kill us if he decided he needed to, Ino admitted after a moment, looking down. I told him that he was wrong. That Naruto could never kill us. That's very commendable. Naive, but commendable, Inoichi said, almost wincing at despair and hurt on her face. Turning back to his flowers, he sighed. See, a persona can sometimes take over rather easily too, according to Ibukai, and when that happens, you has a serious problem. Still, it's not something to really worry about. Why not? Because Naruto and Anko, they both show restraint. That's a sign of their strength, of how much they care about this village, Inoichi said, pausing to glance at her. So, you don't mind me hanging out with him? Ino said uneasily, reaching out to stroke the petal of a flower. I trust him. Inoichi smiled slyly. But I do mind you hanging out with him. What? Why? You just said that. Ino screeched heatedly. I trust him, but honey, he's a teenage boy, and you're my daughter, Inoichi interrupted smoothly. You're lucky I let you out of your room at all. Dad. Oh. But I'm being honest. I know how these things he was interrupted by the bell to the shop's door ringing and a familiar voice. Oi, Ino-chan. Are you here? Ah. Naruto-kun. Ino called back, startled, and then flashing Inoichi a smile, hurried out front. The older man sighed, feeling a war of instincts battling inside him. Fatherly instincts, ninja instincts, and old prejudices. By Dad, I'm going out to lunch with Naruto-kun. Ino called back, and then, before Inoichi could respond, the bell rang and he was left alone in the shop. Sighing, Inoichi rubbed the bridge of his nose. First chance he got, it looked as if he was going to speak with Naruto about how to treat Ino. Well, at least Ino's taste in boys seemed to be improving as boyfriends went. Naruto wasn't so bad. Still, I'd be just as happy if she never dated anyone. Panting, Sasuke studied the training field intently. For the most part, it showed signs of his heavy training assaults. He was growing stronger. Lifting a hand, he studied the charred flesh, then snapped it shut into a fist. There was a flare of pain, but he banished it quickly. Stronger, faster. But he could remember facing Itaki. Could remember that night in exact detail, and he knew that he was still far from strong enough. Gaining just a little strength would not be enough. He needed to grow even more powerful as quickly as possible. To do so would require a proper sensei, one who could teach him what he needed to learn. It would require delving into forbidden practices, medical kinbutsu to enhance his abilities, activating the unexplained seal on his neck, and seeking out a sanin. Ultimately, after he had seen to all of that, it would mean paying the high price to gain the same eyes as Itaki. He was poised to the medical kinbutsu. Sakura was already learning medical jutsu, and she was surprisingly talented in that field, just as she had been with genjutsu. She would, when he was ready to leave the village, has to come with him. She would be too valuable in his quest for vengeance to leave behind. He had stressed his desire for her to learn as much medical knowledge as she could, and she would pour her soul into it. She was in love with him, after all. Sensing someone approaching, Sasuke turned his head slightly to discover Sakura hugging herself. She was obviously lost in thought, unaware of where she was going. He frowned ever so slightly, wondering at why she would be doing such a thing. Sakura. The girl paused, looking up in wide-eyed surprise. Sasuke raised an eyebrow, anger stirring, as he noted things that he had never seen before. Her green eyes were rimmed with red, her posture spoke of trying to shelter her body, and there was an air of despair around her. Sasuke-kun, I didn't know. Sakura said, then forced a smile. Has I told you that Ino's aunt Tsunade-sama is interested in my talent? Ino told her about how I sped up her recovery and she's interested. According to Ino, Tsunade-sama said that anyone that could figure out how to perform that level of healing just from reading scrolls has to be special. Sakura minus. So, see, I'm really doing it. Like you wanted, I'm going to study as much Izaibatsu and Venbutsu as possible. I'm going to get strong, Sakura said hurriedly, beginning to rattle on more and more as if trying to reassure them both. Just give me enough time, Sasuke-kun, and I promise I won't disappoint you minus. Do you love me? Sakura stopped immediately and stared at him with wide, fearful eyes. Of course I do, Sasuke-kun. Sasuke said as he studied her face. It was, despite the sadness in her eyes she was trying to hide, beautiful. Something to be protected regardless of her role in his plans for vengeance. Sasuke-kun, if I've done anything to make you mad or to minus. Sakura, Sasuke said, turning to look at the tearful girl, how much do you love me? More than anything, Sakura admitted firmly, moving toward him hesitantly. Sasuke-kun, what is it? Why are you minus? Then tell me what is wrong. And nothing. Nothing at all, Sasuke-kun. What is wrong? Sasuke said curtly, eyes narrowing. Sakura hesitated, taken back by his tone, and then, haltingly, the story came out. About her father, about how she kept what he did hidden from everyone. About how her mother turned a blind eye to his abuse, how she couldn't bring herself to fight back because he was her father and she loved him despite what he did to her. It just poured out and, for the first time, Sasuke understood why Sakura was so devoted to him. Halfway through she was crying uncontrollably, bordering on hysterical. Sasuke listened with a stony silence, something inside him demanding the immediate and painful death of her father. Before long, she had collapsed to her knees crying and begging Sasuke to forgive her and not hate her. Sasuke quietly knelt, reaching out to touch her hands gently. There were a lot of things prompting his actions, his plans for vengeance, the fact that she was so loyal to him, and the simple fact that he did care for her. Sakura looked up at him, tears coursing down her cheeks, and Sasuke carefully helped her back to her feet. Sakura tried to stop, she wiped at her eyes furiously and turned away, shoulders shaking. I am sorry. You should be training. Training can wait, Sasuke said evenly. You and the Yamanaka girl are friends now, correct? Ha. Very well, Sasuke said with a curt nod. Then we shall gather your things and move you in with her. But she might not. Sasuke-kun, it's more complicated than minus. Sakura started to protest before he cut her off. If you can't stay with them, I still own several buildings. However, I will not allow you to remain in that place with your father. That said, he turned and started out of the training field before he paused to look back at her. Are you coming? Ha. Ino could honestly say that she had never met someone so fixated or stubborn about changing their outfit as Naruto. She had casually mentioned taking him shopping for a new jacket, in celebration of his promotion. Naruto had reluctantly agreed, but then had for the last 7 stores shot down every single option she had come up with. Talk about infuriating. He seemed bound and determined that if it did not have orange in it, he would not be wearing it. Of course, Ino guessed that stemmed from his desire for attention. Kami knew his entire personality was fixated on drawing as much attention as humanly possible, which sort of made her wonder how he had managed to complete an assassination mission. Putting such thoughts aside, Ino studied the various jackets. She had made it a point of finding black jackets, determined to get him to wear that color. It looked good on him. The only drawback in Ino's opinion was other girls thinking the same thing. Still, it was her requirement, and she would be damned if she backed off on that. Selecting a black and red jacket, she turned to hold it up for his inspection. What about this? Naruto stared at her. He actually seemed to consider the color combination. Ino held her breath, aware of the attention he was drawing, being the village hero and hence in a hurry to get out of the store. Nope, I want orange, Naruto said finally with a sigh. Agaz. Ino shouted, making the other patrons quickly scatter and Naruto blink. Jabbing him in the chest, she waved the jacket around wildly. You are the single most bull-head boy I've ever met. There are no orange jackets or jackets with orange in them. Then I'm not gonna buy one. Naruto shot back. Fine. Ino bellowed, slamming the jacket back on the rack before stomping through the store and out into the street. Venting, she started off glowering, unable to believe that she had wasted her time trying to help that idiot. Honestly, infatuation, or not, he just wasn't worth the frustration. Ino-chan. Naruto suddenly shouted from behind her, and Ino turned, fixing him with her glare of death. Naruto paused, flinched, then hurried toward her. What do you want? Ino snapped, crossing her arms. I'm leaving. Fine. Go. If you don't want to find a new jacket, I'm not gonna keep you here. The village, Naruto finished, staring at her curiously. Ino-chan, I'm leaving the village. Ho. What? Why? Ino blinked, staring at him in surprise. A part of her screamed not to let him go. You just got done with a really high-ranked mission, and you saved the village. Now they're wanting to drag you off on another mission. Not exactly, Naruto said, looking at the Hokage mountain. Oi, it's complicated, but it's a training trip with Iro Sennin. I'll be gone for 3 years. 3. Ino paused and gaped at him. Why so long? Why do you gotta go on a damn training trip? Because, Naruto said, looking at her, his eyes intent as they had been in Forest of Death. There are people out there, strong as the Hokage, after me, and people like me. If I stay, I'll put everyone in danger. I'll come back when I'm strong enough to protect you. Ino opened her mouth to retort, then paused as what he said registered. He seemed unaware of it, but his words had been very telling. He had said strong enough to protect you, not strong enough to protect the village or any other possible variation. Her specifically, and through her those others that were precious to him. Ino couldn't help but blush and look away, feeling far more special than she had ever thought possible. Oi, I almost forgot, I got you something. Naruto suddenly said, startling her. Turning, Ino watched as he dug through the pockets of his Chunin vest and then, grinning, produced a delicate chain necklace. Holding it out, he looked so proud his eyes were even closed in that fox-like manner he normally saw when he was eating ramen. Reaching out, she took the chain and then blinked, staring at the necklace in curiosity. At first glance, it appeared as nothing more than a triangular pendant. Upon closer inspection, however, she discovered tiny candy etched into the pendant, forcing her to squint while trying to make out what they meant. Good luck, friendship, and love. Ino couldn't help but blush even more. Naruto, Ino gulped, looking up at him. You know what this says, right? Naruto blinked, then tilted his head. Oh, well, yeah. Good luck and stuff. Nodding, he crossed his arms. Anyway, I gotta go. That stupid Iro Sennin is gonna bitch non-stop if I'm late. Ino watched the boy turn and start down the street, the necklace heavy in her hand. Naruto. He skidded to a stop, then turned in confusion. Ino slipping the necklace on, marched toward him, self-conscious that more than a few people had stopped to watch the two of them. When she reached him, she paused, staring at him as if trying to decide something. Ino-chan. Is something wrong? Naruto asked in that childish way of his, hands behind his head and eyes closed. That was when Ino gave him her first kiss. It was not a breath-stealing, world-stopping, passionate kiss. It was shy, awkward, but earnest. He was startled for a moment, then kissed back just as shyly and awkwardly, and when Ino broke the kiss, she stared at him. There was only one thing for her to say after that. Be careful. When he nodded numbly, she turned and rushed off before he could recover. Despite all the amused looks she was receiving, Ino was almost laughing. He even tasted like ramen. Naruto had a very short list of things he treasured until that moment. Ramen had been at the top of that list. Now at the top of the list was a seemingly pointless act. Because not 10 minutes ago, right where he was still standing, Naruto had just received his first kiss. A real kiss. From a girl. That had said he was more important than Sasuke. So, yes, in his world, ramen was now only a bunch of noodles, and the color orange could have been yellow with pink polka dots. Standing there still as a statue, the blonde couldn't even fathom how to describe what he felt. Warm, unbelievably happy, surprised, terrified, shocked, and little disappointed. Then, top it all off, he had newly raging urges rushing into his system. Then it was all brought to a screeching halt, as he remembered the simple fact that he was supposed to be leaving the village. Then, another horrible fact reared its head: he would be leaving for 3 years. Those realizations sent a chill up his spine. All of a sudden, leaving was a lot more difficult. Leaving Anko, well, that was like cutting a hand off. He hated it. Wished like all hell he didn't have to, but he knew it was the right thing to do. Now leaving INO, who had just kissed him, that was like cutting the rest of his arm off. He soundly and firmly rejected the idea of leaving her and Anko. Then, thankfully, the darker part of Naruto decided to pipe up. It pointed out with dark amusement that he should stay that way when both INO and Anko had their hearts ripped out or throats cut. He could cry and know he caused it. That he could promise over their graves to get vengeance to them. The voice was like a bucket of ice water washing over him, snapping him back to the reality of the situation. He had to leave, now more so than ever, because he had more than just Anko to protect now. With a manful sigh, he turned and trudged down the street, forcing himself to keep going. Forcing his mind away from the feeling of defection, he instead wondered what exactly he would learn. Reaching the marketplace, he paused, seeing the buxom figure of Tsunade standing on the corner, talking to an old man. The female Sanin seemed to notice his attention and turned, letting her conversation come to an abrupt halt. Naruto raised an eyebrow and then started across the street, passing her. Pausing, he glanced up at her, meeting her gaze steadily. "So, you're leaving now, ho?" "Yeah." Naruto paused, blinking. "How'd you know?" "Freya told me, seemed to think I would care what he was doing," Tsunade said, then, reaching out, put a hand on his head fondly. "You just be careful, okay?" "Oh. Yeah, of course," Naruto managed, feeling a bit awkward. "Well, get going, you runt," Tsunade said, shudging him away slightly, sending him stumbling down the street. Shaking his head and recovering, Naruto glanced back at her, then continued on his way in confusion. Deciding that Tsunade wasn't all bad, Naruto turned his attention to the people on the street. They all waved and smiled, treating him like a favorite son. Naruto of course smiled and waved back, more to play up to them than out of any real feeling of fondness. After all, he was going to need their support when he became Hokage. "Naruto." Pausing, Naruto turned to the voice and found Shino quietly standing on the corner. Raising an eyebrow, Naruto cocked his head to the side slightly. "Oi, Shino, what's up?" "I merely wished to say hi," Shino said, then paused, hands in his pockets. "I will keep an eye on her for you." "Ho. Who are you?" "INO." Naruto jerked slightly, surprised. "Wah. Now no, you're crazy, I mean." Then stopping, he scratched the back of his head, mumbled a thanks and hurried off, unnerved about how the boy knew Kami. Until a few minutes ago, Naruto hadn't even known she was interested in him. Hell, he hadn't even known he was interested in her. Shivering, he hurried on, anxious to get away from the insect user on the off chance that he was psychic or something. A few minutes later, Naruto reached the final street and found the lane empty and the gates open. There, leaning against the post, was one outlandishly dressed older man and a cave bunshine holding a pack. Naruto hesitated, aware that once he walked those last few steps and took that pack, he wouldn't be back in Konoha for 3 years. Kami, that felt like a lifetime. Taking a breath, steeling himself, Naruto started that final walk. Who would have thought he could feel bad about leaving Konoha? He had grown up rejected and neglected, an orphan with no real attachments, until he had forged his first friendship and family through blood and murder. Coming to a stop, he stared at the older man, who had his eyes closed and arms crossed. "So, you ready?" Freya asked casually, not moving. Naruto glanced from him to the cave bunshine, then turned to stare up at the massive Hokage mountain. His eyes swept the stone visages, taking in the sight. This would be the last image he had. He memorized every detail, then let his gaze linger on the Yondemu's face. "Yeah," Naruto said, turning to take the pack and find Freya leading the way out of the village. Patting the kunai he now had openly strapped to his thigh, Anko's favorite kunai, he took a breath and followed. "I'm ready." And with that, Uzumaki Naruto left Konoha. But he wasn't forgotten, as several dozen carefully planned pranks went off all over the village, and the Hokage cursed his name once more. Because his precious was stolen, and the village was once more sold out of every copy of Ika Ika. Location unknown. He stared at the 8 other shadowy figures, each shimmering as they hid in the gloom of the dark cage. The air, even through the jutsu, thick with distrust and unease. He took a breath and let it out slowly, eyes drifting to the first he knew would speak. "Fufu. All of us meeting like this. We haven't done this since the news of the QB's false death." The largest of the group, with a massive sword, said. "Or Orochimaru's defection," the shadowy figure with a large scorpion-like tail said. Both will be remedied shortly, he intoned seriously, glancing at the shadowy figure of the giant plant-like ninja, signaling for his report without words. The QB vessel has left Konoha, escorted by Freya of the Sanin. There was a moment of silence, as this news was digested, each member shifting slightly. Then the newest member spoke up, one of the so-called zombie twins. So, that Orochimaru wasn't lying. Of course not, he said simply, knowing that the C4 user would speak next. There's no need to be impatient. Yeah. We has 3 years. Yeah. Yes. First, I think we should deal with Orochimaru's defection, the scorpion-tailed shadow said. He'll be easy enough. We'll has to begin gathering the others now, he said, soothing the group and bringing the meeting to the point. Kusa has offered 2 Hylias in their war, so we has a base for our operations, so we begin now. With the QB, soon everything will be in our hands completely. That's it to this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe to the next video, as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlist. Hope you would like them too.